Chapter 162. What's the matter? Tell me. Madame D asked. I just want to ask why these bowls of bird's nest porridge are the same. What if I make a mistake and hurt my little brother in my mother's belly? Qin Wanru said unhurriedly. Madam, why did you make the same bowl of bird's nest porridge as my mother? I remember that you didn't like bird's nest porridge before. I remember that once the kitchen mistook your meaning and made the original bird's nest porridge into bird's nest porridge. Madam even beat the kitchen supervisor and threw the bird's nest porridge directly on the supervisor. Do you remember this, madam? It happened in Jiangzhou because Madame D threw the hot bird's nest porridge on the supervisor of the kitchen and made a big deal of it. The reason why it was so big was that the supervisor was not the son of the servants in the mansion. He came to help the servants do a good job and temporarily worked as a supervisor for a period of time. Later, Madame D also gave some money to the supervisor, but the supervisor's family was not satisfied, so it became a big fuss. Fortunately, Qin Huayong had great power in Jiangzhou and it didn't take long to suppress it. But everyone in the mansion knew it. After saying this, Qin Huayong's face suddenly changed. If it was true, Madame D's matter today was full of doubts. Thinking of Madame D's attitude in the past and thinking that it seemed to be caused by the bird's nest porridge, Qin Huayong's face became more and more gloomy. Did Madame D want to deal with the baby in Shui Rulan's belly? Otherwise, why did she, who didn't like bird's nest porridge, make a fuss? First, she specially bought the bird's nest and didn't use the bird's nest sent by Duke Yong's mansion. Then, the new old maid met Qin Yu and Qionghua, and Qin Yu made a fuss with Qionghua. Did it represent Madame D's purpose? If it was true, all the previous specious explanations could be explained. Everything was prepared early and they were just waiting for her to ask. Madame D really had bad intentions. Shui Rulan felt relieved. Although she didn't say anything, she was afraid that Qin Wanru couldn't deal with Madame D. Nanny Zhou's explanation not only made Madame D sound innocent, but also made her feel aggrieved. This matter involved her people, so it was more inconvenient for her to speak at this time. She could only pin her hope on Qin Wanru. When Madame D heard Qin Wanru's words, she immediately knew that something was wrong. Qin Huayong was becoming more and more distrustful of her. His words were full of doubts. Looking up at Qin Huayong's extremely ugly face, she could no longer pretend to be calm and immediately said to Qin Wanru, Wanru, what do you mean by this? Don't tell me I didn't like it before, but now I like it, okay? Of course Madame can choose to drink as she pleases, but don't you think it's too much of a coincidence? Even Madame came faster than others. I remember that I came from my side faster than Madame's. But when I came, I saw Madame interrogated clearly and was about to beat Qionghua 20 times. Qin Wanru said softly. But these gentle words hit Madame D's heart like a heavy hammer, making her unable to reply for a while. There were too many coincidences, too many abnormalities, and in addition, she and Shui Rulan were not friendly to each other. At this time, even if she insisted to say that she cared about Shui Rulan, she could not say it out. Madame's taste has changed recently. Nanny Zhou saw that it was not good, and hurriedly explained for Madame D. As for when the servant girl came to report, Madame happened to be not in the yard, but quite close to here. Quite close. Where is it? It was said that the first young master of the Qi family came to our mansion to look for Miss Qi, and Madame specially sent a letter to ask us to avoid it. Why, Madame didn't avoid it yourself? Qin Wanru raised her eyebrows and asked. Madame D did ask someone to tell her that they were in the capital city. Although they were old acquaintances in Jiangzhou, it was better to avoid arousing suspicion at this time. Of course, the purpose was to prevent others from seeing Qin Yuru and Qi Tianyu together. But now it became the reason why she couldn't say it, and she didn't expect that it would be related to the matter in the kitchen. Caught unprepared, she could only clench her teeth and explain, Qi Tianyu grew up with me, so there is no need to avoid arousing suspicion. When he came to the capital city, his mother asked me to take care of him. So Madame went to see the first young master of the Qi family. Qin Wanru pressed step by step, and stealthily led the words to Qi Tianyu. I was late and didn't see it, and I was busy with the matter in the kitchen. Madame D clenched her teeth, and a trace of ruthlessness flashed in her eyes. She would not admit it, and she would deal with it as it came. Mother, do you have something to see the first young master of the Qi family? Qin Wanru continued to lead the topic, and every sentence was filled with doubts, so Madame D had to answer. Nothing, I just wanted to see it. Madame D thought for a while and said. Since there is nothing, I just wanted to meet him by chance. It would be good if I met him, but it doesn't matter if I didn't. So what kind of thoughts do you have for the first young master of the Qi family, mother? Qin Wanru slowly tore open the gap that she was interested in, and there was a bit of sarcasm in her eyes. This was also something that Madame D understood, but could not explain. Qianghua was not the only one who was speechless. Seeing the sarcasm in Qin Wanru's eyes, Madame D was so angry that her eyes trembled, and her voice unconsciously became sharp. Qin Wanru, what does this have to do with you? You are so young, but you don't learn good things, and now you know how to force your adoptive mother. Do you really want to force me to admit it? I dare not, madam. I am just stating a fact. Now I ask my father to investigate what happened after the first young master of the Qi family entered the mansion, and find out where he went, where mother went, and who the first young master of the Qi family went to see. Maybe we can find out the truth. Qin Wanru smiled and suggested to Qin Huayong, and then she knew it was time to stop. She stepped back to Shui Rulan's side, and looked at Qianghua. The cause of the matter was Qianghua, and now it could go back to Qianghua. Madame D wanted to grind the knife slowly, but she could not rush. Seeing that Qin Wanru winked at her, Qianghua immediately looked at Madame D with vigilance. Madame D's eyes were almost red with anger. If Qin Huayong was not here to suppress her, she would have lost control and wanted to slap Qin Wanru hard. She was not worried that Qin Huayong would know something, but she was afraid that others would know. Duke Yong's mansion sent a lot of henchmen, and she brought a few with her now. But she could not guarantee that some of them would spread the news to Duke Yong's mansion. If her sister-in-law knew that Qin Yuru and Qi Tianyu had a private meeting in the yard, the marriage between the two mansions would not be possible. General, let me explain. It is not what you think. Seeing Qin Huayong's gloomy face, Madame D hurriedly explained. She could not say it in public, but she could explain it to Qin Huayong in private. Madam, you just asked me what the old maid scolded our madam. It is difficult for me to tell you now, but I can tell madam and general in private. Qianghua had been waiting for her to say this. Hearing this, Qianghua immediately answered. She was also difficult to explain before, so the old maid had the upper hand and was controlled by Madame D, who wanted to beat Qianghua without saying anything. If Qin Wanru came late, Qianghua would have been beaten. Even if she was disabled, it would be a misunderstanding at most. It would be useless even if Shui Rulan wanted to seek justice for Qianghua. But now, Qianghua not only proved herself with Madame D's words, but there were too many coincidences in what Qin Wanru said just now. Qin Huayong had already believed that it must be Madame D's trick. At this time, he did not want to listen to her explanation. He shouted at her, "Go!" Then he turned and left. Madame D stood there with a pale face, and her eyes fell on Qin Wanru and Shui Rulan with hatred. She gritted her teeth and had to follow them. During lunch, there was news that Qin Huayong quarreled with Madame D in her yard and even kicked her. Now he was lying on the bed and could not get up. After Qin Yuru went to see Madame D in a hurry, she went to Qin Huayong's study and begged him to find a doctor to treat Madame D. One doctor was not enough, so he asked several doctors to treat Madame D. It seemed that Madame D was about to die. Madame D's Yulon pavilion was noisy. But no matter how noisy it was, the old maid who stirred up trouble was severely punished. After being beaten 20 times, she was taken away by her family. When old maid Yu sold people, she also signed an irrevocable contract. Even if she was beaten to death, she could not say anything. Moreover, it was said that this matter was about the baby in Madame Shui's belly. The whole mansion knew about it, and it happened in the kitchen. She was there at the time. Many people were there. Although Qin Huayong did not directly say who was responsible, many people saw Qin Huayong leave with Madame D. After that, Madame D was kicked and even the old maid was not well. For a moment, the servants who just entered the mansion shivered. They had just entered the mansion, and one of them was disabled. If they did not do things according to their will in the future, they might end up worse. The mansion was in a mess, and then people were trembling with fear. But there were many people in the main kitchen, and sometimes there were people who brought food in. They sat for a few hours, and some words slowly spread out. People from Duke Yong's mansion came in the afternoon. It was Duke Yong who came to see Madame D with his son. Qin Huayong invited Duke Yong to the study outside, and Di Yan went to Yulan Pavilion to see Madame D. Huayong, I remember that when you proposed to marry my sister, you said that you would always treat her well, and you also said that your mansion has a strict family style. Is this the family style of your mansion? You actually hit her. What a great general you are. Duke Yong and Madame D were biological siblings, and he was also a person who doted on his sister. At this time, without saying anything, he put the teacup heavily on the tea table and looked at Qin Huayong with an unfriendly look. When his sister married Qin Huayong, it was a low marriage. As a son of an aristocratic family, he originally looked down on Qin Huayong, but in that case, he had to marry Qin Huayong. Qin Huayong was prepared. He raised his head and looked at Duke Yong with a bad face. Brother-in-law, you know that I don't have a son. Madame Shui finally got pregnant, but she couldn't bear it and insisted on killing the child. How can I not be angry? Besides, it was an accident. When I left, she rushed over and accidentally kicked her. Chapter 163. Brother-in-law, what do you mean? Qin Huayong's face darkened. I don't mean anything. I just feel that there are so many women who can give birth to children. Why do you marry a widow who has been raised in your family? If this matter is known by others, the censorate will not let you go. Duke Yong snorted and threatened him coldly. The witness is still here. Brother-in-law, have you forgotten? Qin Huayong said with an unkind face. So what? Don't you want the help of Marquis's mansion of Fengyang? Duke Yong said slowly, and his face became serious. When I went to Marquis's mansion of Fengyang, I talked about you and said that I would come down as soon as possible. But, if you are reported by the censorate because of Madame Shui, it will be difficult. You won't take out the witness and say something specious, will you? He meant that if Qin Huayong really took out some evidence to prove that Shui Rulan had no choice but to marry into Qin's mansion and was framed by Madame D, and then she did it to take care of Qin Wanru who was used by Madame D, it would mean that Madame D was not only unvirtuous but also vicious. Duke Yong would never allow Qin Huayong to say so. Otherwise, not only Duke Yong's mansion's reputation would be ruined, but also all the women of Madame D's family would be affected. In other words, if Qin Huayong really said these things in public, Duke Yong's mansion would not only not admit it, but also fall out with Qin Huayong. The foundation of Duke Yong's mansion was incomparable to that of Qin's mansion. Qin Huayong's face was very ugly, but he suppressed his anger and looked at Duke Yong coldly. Brother-in-law, thank you for your concern. But I don't need you to worry about the affairs of my mansion. Seeing Qin Huayong's look, Duke Yong knew that he was angry in his heart, but he was just suppressing it. Duke Yong knew that he should stop while he was ahead, so he stopped asking about this matter and looked a little relaxed. Now I don't know how you are going to deal with this matter. My sister was inexplicably hurt. Even if I don't say anything, you have to say something, right? Brother-in-law, how do you want to say something? In fact, it's very simple. My sister married you first, so she is the first madam. Even if Madame Shui marries you now, she can only be the second madam. Even if she is a secondary wife, she can't be the first madam. Now my sister is sick, so she has to take care of her, right? Duke Yong said. She's pregnant now, it's really inconvenient. Qin Huayong immediately refused. If Shui Rulan really went to Madame D's place, the baby in her belly would definitely be lost. The baby in her belly might be his only child, so he would not agree no matter what. Then your little daughter it is. My sister took care of her for a period of time before, so it's reasonable for her to take care of her now, isn't it? Duke Yong settled for the second best. Qin Huayong was silent for a while. After a while, he nodded. Compared with Shui Rulan, Qin Wanru was indeed more suitable. Moreover, it seemed that Duke Yong's mansion would not give up until they sent one over. That's good. I'll go to see my sister now and ask her to be careful in the future. It's not good to be so reckless. This time she accidentally hurt herself, but next time she may accidentally hurt someone else. Duke Yong showed a smile on his face, and his attitude became amiable. He even said that Madame D accidentally fell down. Next time, she really needs to be careful. She won't be fine every time. Qin Huayong forced a smile on his face, but his words had a different meaning. The smile on Duke Yong's face immediately faded, but then he smiled again. He stood up and reached out to pat Qin Huayong's shoulder. Good, good. In the future, Uncle Lang and I will join hands and definitely help you gain a firm foothold in the imperial court as soon as possible. After saying that, he walked out with a smile. After a few steps, he looked at Qin Huayong, who was still sitting in the chair behind him, and said in surprise, "Why don't you go to see my sister together? Such a thing has happened. If you don't go to see her, it will be misunderstood. The censorate in the capital city is most likely to find this kind of news. When it comes to the report, it will be bad." Knowing that he was threatening him, Qin Huayong snorted coldly, stood up, walked to the table, and said, "Brother-in-law, you go to see her first. I'll go there later. I won't disturb you too. I have an invitation card sent by Rui and Great Elder Princess, and I'm thinking whether I should go or not." From Rui and Great Elder Princess Mansion. Duke Yong was stunned, and then his complacent face became a little ugly. The news that his madam was driven out by Rui and Great Elder Princess was now widely spread in the capital city, and all kinds of unpleasant words were thrown at Duke Yong's mansion. This was also an important reason why Countess Yong didn't come to Qin's mansion today. No matter who she met, she felt ashamed, especially the madams she was familiar with. Although they didn't say anything, their expressions and looks were all disdainful. Is Rui and Great Elder Princess going to hold a banquet again? Duke Yong snorted coldly and continued to ask. She was just a princess with an idle position. Did she really think that she had any real power? They really regarded her as the Empress Dowager in the palace. They didn't know that the princess mansion had long been in decline, and there was only Rui and Great Elder Princess left in the princess mansion. It's not from Rui and Great Elder Princess Mansion, but from Duke Xing's mansion. Rui and Great Elder Princess transferred it to me on behalf of her. Qin Huayong turned around the desk, sat in front of it, picked up the invitation card on the table, and said after looking at it for a few times. What, Duke Xing's mansion? Duke Yong's face changed. Duke Xing's mansion was not Duke Yong's mansion. Duke Yong's mansion was far higher than Duke Yong's mansion in terms of title and holy favor, even higher than his brother-in-law, Marquis of Fengyang, who had real power. Duke Yong's mansion looked beautiful outside, but in fact, it didn't have many achievements. In the circle of bigwigs in the capital city, everyone knew that Duke Yong's mansion had actually been in decline. Both the current Duke Yong and the next heir Di Yan were mediocre people who didn't have any achievements. Di Yan couldn't even be regarded as a mediocre person. He was just a playboy among the nobles in the capital city. Duke Xing's mansion couldn't be compared with Duke Xing's mansion, which was now in the middle of the sky. Yes, it's from Duke Xing's mansion. They want to thank Wanru for saving Master Hao of Duke Xing's mansion. This master should also be the grandson of Rui and Great Elder Princess, right? Qin Huayong had taken the initiative now. His face was gentle and calm, and he continued to look at the card in his hand without raising his eyes, as if he didn't see Duke Yong's changed face. Second Miss Qin saved the master of Duke Xing's mansion, so Duke Xing wants to thank Qin's mansion. Therefore, he asked Rui and Great Elder Princess to transfer the card to you. Duke Yong suddenly felt that he couldn't look down on Qin Huayong anymore. He didn't expect that Qin Huayong could really get in touch with Duke Xing. If Duke Xing really talked to Qin Huayong, it would only take him 1 or 2 days to get the job. Qin Huayong was a general who had fought in the battlefield and made some military achievements. This was also the reason why he was stationed in one place alone before. Now he was transferred back to the capital city, and it was only a matter of time that he would be put in an important position. If Duke Yong blocked him too much, he was afraid that he wouldn't be on good terms with him. Moreover, now Duke Xing's mansion was there, so he couldn't block him even if he wanted to. Thinking of this, Duke Yong smiled again and said to Qin Huayong, "Then you stay here and watch it. We need to make friends with Duke Xing's mansion. I will go to see my sister first." She didn't do it well this time, and she really blamed herself. "Okay, thank you, brother-in-law," Qin Huayong said with a smile, but his eyes fell on the card in his hand. This card was not sent to him by Rui and Great Elder Princess, but to Qin Wanru. It was Qin Wanru who sent Qin Yu to transfer the card to him. Originally, he just wanted him to have a look and ask his opinion. He didn't make a decision at the moment, so he just threw it on the table. He was worried about Qin Wanru, such a little girl, going in and out of Duke Xing's mansion. He didn't dare to let Shui Rulan, who was too tired now, go out with her. Duke Xing's mansion was a little complicated, and he didn't want Qin Wanru to get involved too much. Originally, he couldn't find a reason, but now Duke Yong found a very good reason for him, and he also deterred Duke Yong with it. It was the best of both worlds. Go to Rui and Great Elder Princess's mansion and tell them that Madame D accidentally fell and hurt herself. Second Miss has to take care of her, so she can't go to Duke Xing's mansion. After making up his mind, Qin Huayong ordered. A servant hurriedly turned out from behind the door, bowed respectfully to him, and took the card in his hand. Qin Huayong waved his hand, and the servant left with the card. He stood up, walked to the window, and watched the servant run out in a hurry. Qin Huayong's face became serious. Duke Yong's mansion. Duke Yong didn't stay in Qin's mansion for a long time. He sat in Madame D's place for a while and said a few words to Madame D, and then left in a hurry. Di Yen stayed. Although he and Qin Yuru didn't have an official title before, both old Madame of Duke Yong's mansion and Madame D had already approved of him. It was reasonable for him to stay and take care of Madame D for a few days. In the evening, Qin Wanru got the news from Qin Huayong that she would start to take care of Madame D tomorrow. After hearing the news, the two servant girls and Nanny Yu were very anxious. It was obvious that Madame D had bad intentions towards Qin Wanru. This time, it was because of Qin Wanru that Qin Huayong saw through her evil plan. If Qin Wanru really went to Yulan Pavilion, she would be tortured to death by Madame D. Qin Wanru was not in a hurry. She picked up a small showerhead and carefully watered the flowers of the Tang Qianyan by the window. As expected, the flowers were raised in the capital city. Although they didn't look very good, at least they were much better than they were in Jiangzhou when they were half dead. Did father tell you about the card? She changed the direction and carefully watered the roots of the Tang Qianyan, while asking. Of course, she specially sent this card to Qin Huayong, and she sent it after she heard that Madame D had an accident. Although she was very surprised that Madame D was kicked, she was not surprised that Duke Yong would take this opportunity to come here. Chapter 164. The general said that he had rejected it. Qin Yu answered. That's good. Qin Wanru smiled slightly, put down the small shower, and wiped her hands with a handkerchief. Before things were clear, she did not want to get too close to Duke Xing's mansion. This invitation card was bound to be sent to Qin Huayong, and Duke Yong came at the right time. On the one hand, Qin Huayong could take advantage of it, and on the other hand, Qin Huayong could reject this invitation card. It was better and more reasonable for Qin Huayong to do it than her. She had a suspicion, and she also guessed it with this invitation card. At this time, some doubts had been cleared, but to take care of the sick. She did not want to go. Her watery eyes fell on her handkerchief, and she watched her white and tender fingers wipe them one by one. Her long and black eyelashes fluttered a few times, just covering all the emotions in her eyes. Miss, Madam D, really want to take care of the sick? Nanny Yu was really worried. Looking at Qin Wanru's unhurried look, she could not help but ask again. Yes, to take care of the sick. Since Duke Yong's mansion asked me to, how can I not go? Qin Wanru smiled slightly, turned back to sit in the chair, looked up at Nanny Yu and said, Nanny Yu, please ask Miss Qi if she wants to go with me when I go to take care of the sick tomorrow. Miss wants to go with Miss Qi. She will not be willing, right? Nanny Yu did not understand what she meant. She will be willing. I heard that the heir of Duke Yong will stay in the mansion to take care of Madam. Qin Wanru raised her head and said calmly. Miss Qi likes the heir of Duke Yong. But he is the husband that Madam chose for first miss. Nanny Yu was so shocked that her eyes widened. So what? Qin Wanru said leisurely. In fact, she already knew what Qi Rongji was thinking when she first came that day. How could she give up such a good opportunity? Madam will vent her anger on you. Nanny Yu frowned and said worriedly. Qin Wanru blinked her eyes and said with a bit of playfulness, will she not be angry with me now that I am like this? Hearing what she said, Nanny Yu was speechless. Looking at the pretty miss in front of her, she felt so distressed that she couldn't say anything. She didn't know why Madam was so cruel to plot against the second Mississippi. Even if the second miss was not her biological daughter, the second miss was also a well-behaved and lovely girl. Why did Madam want to ruin the second miss for the first miss? I also think it has nothing to do with our miss even if there is something wrong. Anyway, Madam D always wants our miss to bear all the bad names of the first Mississippi. She wants our miss to be the stepping stone of the first Mississippi. Then why should our miss care about her? This time, they made such a big scene just to torment young miss and make young miss attend to the sick. Who knows what will happen? Yu Jia was completely on Qin Wanru's side. Thinking of the situation at that time, she snorted and said. She had seen Madam's look at that time. She could clearly see the look that Madam wanted Miss to die immediately. Nanny Yu, I also think it is good. At least Miss Qi is here. Even if Madam or the first Miss wants to do something, they have to be careful. Qing Yue also supported Yu Jia and said. Qin Wanru smiled sweetly. Of course, this was also a reason. But the most important thing was that she could use Qi Rongji to distract Madam D and her daughter, so that they would not keep staring at her. With Qi Rongji, who had an ulterior motive, it was impossible not to be chaotic. Then I will go and ask Miss Qi. Nanny Yu could not help but smile when she saw that they were protecting Qin Wanru wholeheartedly. She nodded repeatedly, but her eyes turned red inexplicably. She turned sideways and wiped away the tears at the corner of her eyes. There was a trace of determination in her eyes. Even the two little servant girls were standing by Mrs.'s side wholeheartedly, so she should protect Miss even more. Nanny Yu, wait a moment. Let Qin Yu go. I have something to ask you. Qin Wanru suddenly stopped her and asked Qin Yu to pass the message to Qi Rongji. Qin Yu nodded and left in a hurry. Nanny Yu, did anything happen to Qing Shui these 2 days? Qin Wanru asked. She entrusted all the things in the courtyard to Nanny Yu. Even if she had something to do, she did not ask Nanny Yu to go outside. Nanny Yu thought for a while and said, Qing Shui's temperament has changed a lot compared to when she was in Jiangzhou. She seems to be more enthusiastic all of a sudden, especially Nanny Dong and Dong Xiu'er. When Nanny Dong is not here, she even takes the initiative to accompany Dong Xiu'er. The two of them are now very close. They are almost bosom friends. Qing Shui was under her surveillance, so naturally, she could see it clearly. Dong Xiu'er has a good relationship with her. Qin Wanru frowned. Qing Shui was a problematic person. In order to solve her problem, Madame D deliberately schemed against Chu Lu. Of course, part of the reason was Chu Lu, but one of the most important reasons was Qing Shui. Madame D and Qin Yuru sent this servant girl to her. What they wanted was not small. She had hinted to Nanny Dong that there was something wrong with Qing Shui. Nanny Dong did not care about it, but she did not expect that Qing Shui had such a good relationship with Dong Xiu'er. Did Nanny Dong not tell Dong Xiu'er? Is there anything else besides this? There's nothing else. I rarely send her out. She's only in charge of the menial work in the courtyard. She's Mrs. Personal Maidservant in name, but she doesn't have many responsibilities now. Don't you think we're treating her coldly? Nanny, you said. Because of Qin Wanru's order, Qing Shui, who was the principal servant girl, was not even allowed to enter Qin Wanru's room. Qin Wanru curled her lips and said to Yujie, bring her along when you clean the outer room. Since she was the principal servant girl, she should do some personal work. Now it was the probation period, so she should be allowed to enter the room slowly. Of course, she could only enter the outer room, and she should be under surveillance. Miss, I know. Yujie said with a smile. Qi Rongji's message was really happy. She even specially said that she would come over tomorrow morning to wait for Qin Wanru. Qin Wanru had already understood Qi Rongji's reaction. She was not on good terms with Qin Yuru now. If she went to visit Madame D, she could at most sit for a while. Madame D also disliked her very much, so she would never ask her to stay. It was even impossible for her to see Di Yen. Qin Wanru could stay with Qin Wanru for a while. At least she could accompany her. Although it was a little impolite, she had a reason. If she kept following Qin Wanru, Madame D and Qin Yuru could not directly drive her away. The next morning, Qi Rongji came early. Qin Wanru, of course, got up early because she had to take care of the sick. They went to Madame D's Yulon pavilion together. They came a little too early. Qin Yuru had not arrived yet, so they waited in the corridor. Qin Wanru stood obediently and did not talk to Qi Rongji. Qi Rongji moved her feet impatiently. She had never done this kind of work of taking care of the sick. Now her feet hurt. If she did not have her own purpose, she would not follow Qin Wanru to suffer this early in the morning. It was early in the morning, and there was an air vent here. It was quite cold standing there. She glanced at the room with disdain. Needless to say, Madame D deliberately tormented Qin Wanru. She was really a vicious woman. She didn't know when Child D would come. If he saw her waiting in the corridor, would he feel pity for her? Qi Rongji was very proud of her appearance. When she was in Jiangzhou, she and Qin Yuru were famous beauties in Jiangzhou. They were both talented and good-looking. Before she and Qin Yuru quarreled, the door of the mansion was almost broken by the number of people who wanted to marry her. All this was because of Qin Yuru. Otherwise, she would have married the man she liked. The man's identity was inextricably linked to the capital city and he had a good family background. Originally, he would not have married in Jiangzhou. It was because of her good reputation that he came. But in the end, it was ruined by Qin Yuru. Every time Qi Rongji thought of this, she felt that she hated Qin Yuru the most. She would not let Qin Yuru marry into a rich family after abandoning her big brother and ruining her reputation. Since her marriage was ruined by Qin Yuru, she would snatch Qin Yuru's. Of course, she would not act recklessly like before. Although her big brother did not say it clearly, she understood what he meant. She could not act like she did in Jiangzhou. As long as she behaved well, Madame D and Qin Yuru would not dare to fall out with her. Qin Yuru finally came. When she saw Qi Rongji standing in the corridor, she was stunned for a moment. She did not expect to see Qi Rongji here. After the three of them greeted each other, Qin Yuru said, "Rongji, why are you here?" "Sister Wanru and I came to take care of Madame D. This time, I came to the capital city with the care of your mansion." This time, Madame D is sick, and I feel sorry. Qi Rongji tried to soften her voice. You want to take care of Madame D? Qin Yuru was so surprised that her eyes suddenly widened. Although the two families were old friends, they were not relatives. This was so surprising. It's a token of my heart, Qi Rongji said with a smile. Such a gentle smile made Qin Yuru could not help but take a step back. Her eyes became more vigilant. What did Qi Rongji want to do? You, how can you do this? You are a guest. Qin Yuru calmed down and reprimanded slightly. But now I live in Qin's mansion. All this is entrusted by my father and mother to Madame D and the general. I also remember Madame D and the general's care for me. How can I not come to take care of Madame D when she is sick? Otherwise, my big brother will be the first to punish me. Qi Rongji became more and more gentle with a face of gratitude. It seemed that she really wanted to take care of Madame D. Qin Yuru was so angry that her nose was almost crooked. When did Qi Rongji become so well-educated and polite? Moreover, she looked very grateful. Did she want to make trouble again? She had made trouble in Rui, and great elder princess's mansion before. Qin Yuru did not want to make trouble again at this time. My mother appreciates your kindness, but please go back. Qin Yuru refused. Why don't you let me take care of Madame D? I really want to thank Madame D as my mother. Qi Rongji's eyes turned red. She reached out to take Qin Yuru's hand and shook it hard with a look of being wronged. This made Qin Yuru more annoyed. She reached out to pull Qi Rongji's hand angrily and asked in a low voice, What do you want to do? You. Chapter 165. Behind Qin Yuru, Di Yan tilted his head slightly and looked at Qi Rongji from head to toe with a gentle smile on his face. He came a little late and saw Qin Yuru pulling down Qi Rongji's hand impolitely. Qi Rongji looked very aggrieved and her eyes were red and a little timid. Her eyes really resembled his cousin, so he couldn't help but rush over and ask. Cousin. Qin Yuru looked back and called out unhappily when she saw Di Yan. Your Highness. Qi Rongji was secretly happy, but her eyes looked even more aggrieved. After bowing sideways, she purposely wiped the corner of her eyes as if she was wiping away her tears. However, there was a trace of a smile on her face. In Di Yan's eyes, it was a forced smile. Qin Wanru also called out politely, Cousin. Then she stepped aside. She saw the expressions of the three people present. Di Yan's eyes were full of pity, Qi Rongji's evasive look of grievance, and Qin Yuru's eyes were full of anger. Her lips curved slightly and her long eyelashes fluttered twice. She continued to stand obediently as if she didn't see the turbulent undercurrent between them. She had just arrived in the capital and had a lot of things to do. She really didn't have time to play along with Madame D, nor did she want Madame D to torture her and make her take care of Qi Rongji. Cousin Yuru, what's wrong? Di Yan reluctantly withdrew his eyes from Qi Rongji and turned to ask Qin Yuru. Once again, he praised in his heart that Jiangzhou was really full of beauties. Not only was his cousin Qin Yuru a beauty, but even the daughter of Magistrate Qi was also a beauty. Both of them had their own merits and were extremely beautiful. As for Qin Wanru, although she was outstanding, she was still too young. At first glance, it was difficult to treat her as an adult girl. Therefore, compared to Qi Rongji, Qin Wanru was not attractive. First Miss Qi insisted on taking care of mother. What a joke! Qin Yuru said impatiently. She just happened to see Di Yan's eyes falling on Qi Rongji and his reluctance to leave her. How annoying! First Miss Qi wants to take care of aunt. Why? Di Yan finally found a legitimate opportunity to talk to Qi Rongji. He looked up at her and asked. My father and mother asked Madame D and General Qin to let me come to the capital city. They told me again and again that the two families are good friends. After I came to the capital city, I should treat Madame D and General Qin as my relatives and be filial to them like my parents. Now Madame D is sick, I have to take care of her, otherwise, I will feel uneasy. Qi Rongji said softly. Di Yan nodded and the admiration in his eyes became more obvious. She was indeed a kind girl. Although she came from a small place like Jiangzhou, her manners were not lacking at all. In fact, her manners were even better than those of ordinary young ladies from aristocratic families. If that's the case, then. Di Yan said. Since they were here, they could go in together. It was good to have one more person to take care of the sick. Qin Wanru was too young to know anything about taking care of the sick. Qi Rongji looked more reliable. Cousin, mother has to make the decision. Seeing that Di Yan agreed, Qin Yuru hurriedly stopped him. Being interrupted by Qin Yuru, Di Yan was a little unhappy, but he did not take it to heart. It was indeed up to Madame D to make the decision. Let's go in together. It's a windy place here and it's very cold. My cousins are so thin and weak, how can they bear it? Although Qin Yuru was in charge here, Di Yan still made the decision to bring them into the room. It was indeed cold to stand in the corridor. He had only been here for a while, but he already felt like shivering. It was a cloudy day today. Although it did not rain, it was very cold. Di Yan turned and went into Madame D's outer room. Watching Di Yan go in, Qin Yuru could only helplessly ask Qin Yuru and Qi Rongji to follow him. Originally, her mother deliberately let Qin Wanru stay here to feel the wind. When they entered the inner room, an old maid hurried over. Seeing them, she greeted them with a smile, Your Highness, First Miss, Second Miss, and Miss Qi, our madam has woken up and is taking medicine now. You can go in now. They followed the old maid around the screen and into the inner room. Madame D was taking medicine. A little maid knelt on one knee in front of the bed, holding a bowl of medicine in her hand, and was carefully feeding Madame D. A white cloth was tied on her head, and she looked haggard. Behind her, there was a thick cushion, and the room was filled with the strong smell of medicine. Qin Wanru sniffed with her nose and realized that Madame D did not look like what she saw. She was just using some ordinary medicine, and the dosage was not much. It was just that the smell was a little strong, and it seemed that she deliberately made the smell a little stronger. Qin Wanru was very clear in her mind. And in this strong smell of medicine, Qin Wanru smelled a faintly discernible strange smell. Her long eyelashes paused, and then fluttered twice. Her eyes then fell on the little maid who was kneeling on one knee in front of the bed. She was a very small maid, about the same height as herself. The room was full of maids and old maids who were much bigger than her, but none of them came up to help her. It could be seen that this little maid was struggling. Her face was tense, and her knees were slightly trembling. There was a feeling of exhaustion. So all of this had been prepared for a long time. After everyone came forward and bowed, Qin Yuru took a step forward, and was about to take the bowl of medicine in the hands of the maid, intending to feed Madame D herself. But she was stopped by Nanny Zhou. Oh, my first miss, your height is not suitable. It's okay if you feel uncomfortable kneeling, but you can't feed Madame D. This height is a little too high. But I'm taking care of mother, shouldn't I feed mother the medicine myself? Qin Yuru said hesitantly, as if she really wanted to feed Madame D the medicine. Qin Wanru lowered her head slightly, as if she did not see Qin Yuru's glance. She looked like she was in a daze. She was such a small maid, and at this time, she was the only one who could correspond to her. It seemed that this was the so-called taking care of mother that Madame D and Qin Yuru had prepared for her. First miss, you're a little too tall. Nanny Zhou shook her head, and said helplessly, if only you were a little shorter, you could just scoop the medicine to Madame D's mouth. My hands can't reach straight, otherwise it would be best for me to drink the medicine myself. Instead, I asked you all to take care of Madame D. I'm afraid that this little maid can't stand it, so I have to trouble you all. Madame D said with a bitter smile. Her face without makeup looked old and a little tired. Qin Wanru knew that it was not only because of her injury. Madame D's life now was not the same as in Jiangzhou. When things went wrong, it was easy for people to look old. Hearing her words, almost everyone looked at Qin Wanru. After all, Qin Wanru was the only one present who was suitable. At this time, if not her, who else could do it? Madame D really wanted to force her to humiliate her. First, she forced her to kneel, and then what? Accidentally spilling the medicine on her face or on her body. Qin Wanru sneered in her heart. She raised her head, and a pair of cold eyes fell on Madame D. Then, a smile slowly appeared on her face. Madam, since big sister is not suitable, let me do it. We can't let the heir of Duke Qin help to feed the medicine here. Although I heard that the children of aristocratic families in the capital practice the horse stance, they can do it for a long time even if they have to squat. After saying this, she took a few steps forward to take the medicine bowl. Di Yan was a little embarrassed. He was not good at the horse stance. He was only good at fishing for 3 days and drying the net for 2 days. It was good enough that he had a good posture. How could he squat down and feed the medicine to Madame D? Second miss, let me do it. Seeing Di Yan's expression, Qi Rongji rolled her eyes and suddenly pulled Qin Wanru. She thought that standing up at this time would solve Di Yan's embarrassment, and he would definitely have a better impression of her. Originally, she came for Di Yan, so how could she let go of such a great opportunity to show off? This is not very good. Qin Wanru looked at her awkwardly, and then looked at Di Yan who was beside her. What's wrong with it? I originally came to take care of the sick with sincerity. How could I dislike it? Even if I'm a little taller, I can kneel a little lower. As long as I have this sincerity, I can definitely do it well. As Qi Rongji spoke, she took 2 steps forward, grabbed the medicine bowl from the hands of the little maid, and was about to kneel. Quick, hold Miss Qi. At this time, Madame D also reacted and hurriedly shouted. If she really asked Qi Rongji to kneel and take care of her like this, it would be unreasonable. Originally, Qi's mansion had already used the previous incident as an excuse. If there was another incident, she was afraid that when the time came, they would be even weaker than the people of Qi's mansion. Nanny Zhou also reacted quickly. She hurriedly reached out to hold Qi Rongji, and kept shouting, No, no, no. Miss Qi, let me do it. Big sister, quickly help me get the medicine bowl. Qin Wanru blinked her big eyes twice, and also stepped forward. She reached out as if she wanted to take the medicine bowl that Nanny Zhou and Qi Rongji were holding together. Hearing what she said, Qin Yuru had to step forward and also reached out to grab it. Just like that, several people bumped into each other. No one knew who bumped into each other, or whose hands slipped, but the bowl of medicine, which still seemed to be steaming hot, just fell on Madame D. Lying on the bed, Madame D could not avoid it in time. Seeing the bowl of medicine falling on her, she hurriedly reached out to block it, only to hear ouch, clang, ah, all kinds of sounds were in a mess. Fortunately, most of the medicine splashed on Madame D's body, and only a small part splashed on Madame D's hands. Even so, she still screamed because of the heat. Originally, she did not have any good intentions and wanted to splash Qin Wanru's medicine, so she specially ordered someone to make it a little hot. She did not expect that it would actually splash on her. The 10 fingers were connected to the heart, and it hurt. The empty bowl fell from the bed and hit the ground, breaking into a few pieces. Some pieces even splashed. Qi Rongji was the first to bear the brunt, and her wrist was scratched by a piece. She immediately screamed in pain and sat on the ground. Nanny Zhou fell by the side of the bed and also hurt her foot. Qin Wanru was lying behind Qi Rongji, pressing her other hand in pain. Another piece of porcelain fell by her foot, and it seemed that it was also hurt. Chapter 166. Hurry up and check on Madam. Nanny Zhou stood up with the help of a chair. She was so anxious that her face turned pale. The injury on her leg was not serious and only a little blood came out. She was so anxious that she did not feel any pain. The servant girls and old maids, who were all stunned, hurried over to help and pull the two people in front of the bed. They helped them to sit on a chair and then went to check on Madame D on the bed. Mrs. Chen's face was pale, and there was still a black liquid on one of her hands. She was in so much pain that her whole body was trembling. She couldn't say a word and sat up straight on the bed. She was no longer as sick as she was before. Nanny Zhou hurriedly asked someone to fetch a wet rag to clean Madame D up first. Then, she asked everyone else in the room to leave. She helped Madame D change all the things on the bed and her clothes. Then, she anxiously went outside to fetch a doctor. Qi Rongji and Qin Wanru sat quietly on a chair outside. They looked very panicked and frightened. Qin Yuru looked even more terrible. She sat on a chair and stared coldly at the two people in front of her. She picked up the cup in her hand and smashed it heavily. Did you two do this on purpose? Qi Rongji raised her pale face and said, Sister Yuru, how can you say that to me? I really want to serve Madame D, but I did not expect that Nanny Zhou would come and take it from me. I did not expect that you would also come and take it from me. Qi Rongji looked very wronged. When have you ever been so kind as to help me take care of my mother? It's fine as long as you don't make any trouble, Qin Yuru said angrily. Qin Yuru said angrily. Just now, when Madame D screamed when she was scalded, it still hurt her to think about it. Sister Yuru, how can you say that to me? Qi Rongji sobbed and wiped her tears with a handkerchief. There was a trace of blood on the corner of the handkerchief, which was stained by her injured foot when she was pinching it. Big sister, Miss Qi did not do it on purpose. Qin Wanru said softly. It seemed that she could not stand it anymore. You are not a good person either. You did it on purpose, didn't you? Did you come to make trouble? I knew that you two were up to no good when you came to take care of the sick. Qin Yuru gritted her teeth. Big sister, why do you miss us so much? Qin Wanru said with a shocked face, it is Madame's idea that I come to take care of him. Does Madame also want me to come here to make trouble? You. Qin Yuru was furious, but she was interrupted by Di Yan. Well, it's already like this. They didn't want this to happen. Who would have thought that there would be such an accident? No one wanted it. Moreover, both of them are injured. Cousin, you're actually helping them. Look at them, none of them have any good intentions. Hearing Di Yan's words, Qin Yuru's eyes turned red and she glared at them angrily. Your Highness, I really didn't do it on purpose. Please help me prove my innocence. Otherwise, when my father enters the capital, he will definitely punish me. Qi Rongji cried so hard that her voice could not be heard. She leaned on the table and her whole body trembled. Obviously, she was very afraid of the Qi's family rules. He didn't expect that an aristocratic family with a history of more than 100 years could have such a strict upbringing. Di Yan's impression of Qi Rongji improved. Looking at Qi Rongji, who was crying like a ball, and then at his cousin, who was still looking at him coldly with red eyes, he felt inexplicably annoyed. Wasn't his cousin the most gentle person? Why was she so fierce now? Could it be that what his cousin showed him before was what she wanted him to see? Was what his mother said true? Cousin Yu, let them go first. They can't take care of Aunt like this. Instead, they will make a mess. If people see this, they will think that something serious has happened. Di Yan said unhappily. From inside came Madame D's angry rebuke. He seemed to hear the faint sound of slapping. Here came Qi Rongji's crying and Qin Yuru's fierce voice. Suddenly, Di Yan felt a headache and annoyed. But they scalded my mother. Is it okay? Qin Yuru bit her lip and said. This is also an accident. Cousin Yu, we still want to deal with the burn on Aunt's hand. Both of them are also injured. It is useless to stay here. Instead, they will add to the trouble. Di Yan said. Your Highness, there is no need. Let's stay here. I am worried about Madame D. Qi Rongji raised her head. 2 lines of crystal tears were still flowing down her white and tender cheeks, which made her look more delicate. It's okay. You go back first and deal with the wounds. Later, the doctor will come. When aunt is healed, I will bring someone to check on your injuries. Di Yan directly made the decision, ignoring Qin Yuru. Thank you, Your Highness. Hearing that Di Yan would come, Qi Rongji stopped crying. She wiped her tears with a handkerchief, and her face was faintly flushed. Then go back first. Di Yan waved his hand and said. It was a mess here. Qin Yuru did not look like a person who could be in charge, so Di Yan had to take the responsibility himself. At this time, Qi Rongji was crying again. She held Chun Yi's hand and obediently limped away. Qin Wanru did not stand on ceremony. After bowing deeply to Di Yan, she also left slowly with the help of her servant girl. Cousin. Seeing that the 2 troublemakers had left just like that, Qin Yuru stamped her feet and shouted angrily. Cousin Yu, you go to see aunt first. I will go see if the doctor has come. Di Yan touched his head with a headache. He suddenly felt that it was a mistake for his father to ask him to come to Qin's mansion to take care of his sick aunt. After saying that, he ignored Qin Yuru, who was pouting coquettishly, and turned to stride out. When Qin Wanru returned to her room, Yu Jie and several maids immediately helped her into the inner room. She did not limp too much along the way, so the maids thought that she was not seriously injured. However, when they lifted her skirt, they found that her right calf was dripping with blood, and even the corner of her pants was wet. Miss! How did you get hurt so badly? Yu Jie was so scared that her face turned pale. She was behind Qin Wanru just now. She wanted to pull Qin Wanru back, but Qin Wanru got rid of her and fell over. Yu Jie was shocked at that time, but she also knew that Qin Wanru rushed over by herself. However, even if she rushed up on her own, it was impossible for her to get hurt so badly. Qi Rongji, who was the nearest to her, was not hurt so badly. She only had a slight scratch on her foot. From her angle, Yu Jie could see Qi Rongji's wound, but she did not see Qin Wanru's. She did not expect that her miss would be hurt so badly. Qin Yu carefully rolled up her trousers. As expected, there was a big cut on her calf. It was long and looked deep. The blood had not completely coagulated, and the wound looked a little scary. Qin Yu hurriedly covered it with a handkerchief, and the blood immediately dyed the plain handkerchief. The faces of the people in the room changed. Miss, Yu. Nanny Yu was so anxious that she was about to cry. After thinking for a while, she said, I'll go see if the doctor is here. I'll go to the door of Madam's courtyard and wait. Nanny Yu, you don't have to go. He'll be here soon. I hurt myself, so it's no big deal. Qin Wanru's face was also very pale, and her lips were a lot darker, but there was a smile on her face. Miss, how could you do this? Nanny Yu's voice rose a little involuntarily. She simply did not believe that her miss would do such a thing. Qin Wanru leaned back, and the smile on her face became cold. She slightly raised the corner of her eyes with a bit of hostility. A lot of things can happen when you take care of a sick person. If Qi Rongji did not interfere today, I'm afraid that bowl of medicine was prepared for me. There's medicine in the bowl that can't heal easily after a burn. If such a bowl of boiling medicine was poured on Qin Wanru's skin, even if she did not die, she would probably be crippled. Even if it was not completely poured on her face and only splashed a little, it would not be so easy to get rid of it. Moreover, Qin Wanru also smelled some other medicine in it. The smell was different from the usual medicine. It came from a special medicine. The smell of this medicine was a little special, but it was mixed with the original strange smell of medicine, so it was not obvious. This medicine had a very special effect, which was to make it difficult for the wound to heal. Madame D and Qin Wanru came prepared. Madame D is so vicious. Nanny Yu gasped. Madame D has been vicious for a long time. What should we do now, miss? Yujie originally grew up in the temple, so she did not have much respect for Madame D. In a while, Di Yen will probably accompany the doctor to help us. Qin Yuru will definitely come as well. Qin Wanru said slowly, she will definitely not believe that I am really injured, and I am so seriously injured. She will definitely suggest to see my wound in person, but you guys will not let her see it. Madame D and Qin Yuru's plan failed, and Madame D's hand was burned instead. They would definitely not let it go, and would definitely come to see her and Qin Rongji's wounds, especially Yujie. They would definitely not let her off easily. It would be best if they could get evidence that she was pretending to be injured, and then they could push all the blame onto her. Rest assured, Mississippi. I will definitely protect you and not let Elder Miss see your wound. Nanny, you said. After saying this, she hesitated for a moment and finally asked, Miss, are you really not willing to let Elder Miss see it? Of course I have to let her see it. Not only her, but also father. If you don't let Qin Yuru see it, Qin Yuru will definitely be unwilling, and she will think that I am even more pretentious. At that time, she will make a fuss. Yujie, at that time, quickly go and ask father to come over. You can leave quickly, Qin Wanru instructed Yujie. Take care of the sick. She would not go and let Madame D have all kinds of reasons to deal with her. The reason was sometimes very simple. She would beat Qin Yuru at her own game. No matter how powerful Duke Yong's mansion was, they could not control the fact that they were also injured, and it was because of Madame D. She cast the bait and waited for Qin Yuru to take the bait. And Qin Yuru did not let Qin Wanru down. She had just changed her clothes in the room and was lying on the bed when she heard the noise outside. It was a mess. Chapter 167. She's injured. Why didn't you let the doctor see her? Could it be that she's not hurt? Qin Yuru's eyes fell on Nanny Yu and she said unkindly. Although Di Yen didn't say anything, his eyes were filled with doubt. A doctor in his 30s or 40s was following behind him. They had just come from Qi Rongji's place. Qi Rongji was indeed injured, but her injury was not serious. After Qin Yuru asked the maid to examine her, they concluded that she did not seem to be limping at all. She mocked Qi Rongji on the spot and then brought the doctor to Qin Wanru's place. Compared to Qi Rongji, Qin Yuru thought that Qin Wanru's injury wasn't a problem. Qin Wanru was behind Qi Rongji at that time, and Qi Rongji at least saw blood. Qin Wanru might have deliberately taken advantage of the situation. So when she heard Nanny Yu say that Qin Wanru didn't want to see the doctor, she couldn't help but mock her. Madame D's hand was injured, and it wasn't light. The most important thing was that there was something in the medicine, and it was quite a lot. Originally, she wanted to sprinkle it on Qin Wanru's body. No matter where it was sprinkled, it might be difficult to remove the scar. Unexpectedly, it was sprinkled on Madame D's body. There was even a drop on her face, which was much more serious than the one on Qin Yuru's face. How could Qin Yuru be in a good mood? First miss, the doctor is a man, and our Mrs. leg is injured. It's not very convenient. Nanny Yu said with a troubled look. What do you mean not convenient? It's not like the doctor will see her himself. Let Mei Yan see her and tell the doctor what medicine to prescribe and how much medicine to prescribe. It will be more clear, Qin Yuru said impatiently. Eldest young mistress, you don't actually have to look at it. You can just prescribe some ointment. I've already bandaged second young mistress wound just now, so it's not bleeding anymore. Nanny Yu said tactfully with a smile. Not bleeding anymore. So there's no injury. Since there's no injury, why did you pretend to be seriously injured just now? Did you do it on purpose because you don't want to take care of mother? Qin Yuru said angrily. She glanced at the tightly closed door of the inner chamber and sneered. Today, she would tear off Qin Wanru's disguise no matter what. It was just a suspicion at first, but now it was almost certain that Qin Wanru was pretending. She's not bleeding now, but just now, there was a lot of blood. Our miss was seriously injured. Seeing that Chin Yuru had misunderstood, Nanny Yu hurriedly explained. Why can't I watch it? It's not a big deal if I let Mei Yan watch it. There's no need to refuse and act like you can't let others watch it. Chin Yuru said coldly. She had to watch it today. The wound has just been bandaged. If we take it off again, I'm afraid it won't be good for Mrs. Injury. This old servant thinks it's better to ask the doctor to prescribe some medicine. Nanny Yu said earnestly. Cousin Yu, leave some medicine for Cousin Wan first. Di Yan said. Cousin, how can you say that? Qi Rongji's injuries are not serious. How could she be so serious? Chin Yuru stamped her feet angrily. Di Yan was silent for a moment and looked at Nanny Yu suspiciously. Are they really that badly injured? Crown Prince, you are really heavy. I'm not lying, and neither is our miss. Nanny Yu was so anxious that her forehead was sweating. She spread her hands and looked at Di Yan, pleading for help. This made Chin Yuru even more angry. She pushed Nanny Yu away and was about to barge in. First miss, please wait. Our miss is injured and is resting now. Please don't disturb our miss's rest. Chin Yu cut in from the side and reached out to stop Chin Yuru, looking like she was not going to let her in. This made Chin Yuru even more certain that Chin Wanru was guilty. She reached out to push Chin Yu away again, this time with more force. Chin Yu staggered and was pushed into a chair by the side. The chair then hit the tea table. A few teacups on the tea table rolled down and fell to the ground. Seeing that Chin Yu was about to fall to the ground, another servant girl seemed to want to hold her. Unexpectedly, Chin Yu did not slow down and hit the flower rack on the side. The row of flowers on the rack, together with the porcelain that held the flowers, all fell to the ground and broke into pieces one after another. Chin Yuru was also shocked. She took 2 steps back and did not fall on her. Tables, chairs, flower racks, flowers, and all kinds of porcelain were smashed into pieces on the ground. It was a mess. Fortunately, no one was hit. Chin Yu was also pulled aside by the servant girl who had sharp eyes and quick hands. However, everything in the room was destroyed. Everyone was stunned. Not only inside the room, but also the servants outside the room were stunned. Did the first miss bring people to destroy the second miss's room? Big sister, why did you come to smash my room? No one knew when the door of the inner room was opened. The curtain was slightly lifted, and Chin Wanru stood weakly by the door. Her face was pale and haggard, and her red lips were also pale at this time, showing a clear morbidity. Chin Yuru wanted to say no and that it was an accident, but she was interrupted by Chin Wanru. Big sister, my leg is injured today. Big sister and madam insist that I take care of Chin Wanru. I will go, but can you let me rest for a day and go tomorrow? You were pretending. Chin Yuru was distracted by Chin Yuru's words. Cousin Wanru is really injured. Di Yan pulled Chin Yuru and whispered. Looking at Chin Wanru like this, all his doubts disappeared. She did not need to look at the wound to know that she was indeed injured. What the servant said before was true. Big sister, why do you always have a prejudice against me? You always think that everything I say is not true. You think that I don't want to take care of madam. Madam is sick now, and now she is injured. Shouldn't big sister be taking care of madam at this time? Why do you look so aggressive, as if I am guilty if I don't go now? Chin Wanru raised her watery eyes. Her eyes were as clear as water, but with a bit of coldness. She leaned against the door frame with one of her legs dangling. Anyone could tell that she was really hurt. Let Mei Yan see whether it is true or not. Chin Yuru sneered. No matter what Chin Wanru said, she would not believe it. Moreover, the more Chin Wanru refused to let Mei Yan see, the more she felt that Chin Wanru was pretending. Big sister, what if I don't want Mei Yan to see? Chin Wanru's eyes also became cold. Her body slightly swayed, and Chin Yu hurried over to hold her. You dare not let her see. Chin Yuru said coldly, increasingly feeling that she was reasonable. Big sister brought people to destroy my house because you think I'm a fake, right? Does madam know that you are here to make trouble? Chin Wanru coughed in a low voice. Although there were few people, they were not weak. She raised her watery eyes and asked. Di Yan reached out and pulled Chin Yuru again. He became more and more annoyed. Even if he was a playboy, he felt that there was something wrong with Chin Yuru's response. The room was full of broken pieces. It seemed that Chin Yuru was unreasonable. Shouldn't she talk nicely at this time? So what if mother knows? Chin Wanru, you don't want to take care of madam, do you? Chin Yuru did not intend to let go of Chin Wanru. She shook Di Yan's hand and said. I will go tomorrow. I will take a break today. Can't madam and you stand it? Chin Wanru frowned slightly. She looked at the mess in the room and said, so madam asked you to smash my room? Compared to Chin Yuru's aggressive attitude, Chin Wanru seemed to be particularly tolerant. She even made some concessions. Or it could be called looking at the big picture. So what? Chin Yuru understood that Chin Wanru was feeling guilty. She raised her voice even more. Just when she finished speaking, she heard a cold voice behind her. Yuru, who asked you to smash your sister's room? Chin Huayong strode in. He saw the broken pieces in the room and then looked at Di Yan who was standing aside. He was so angry that his face turned green. In the past, he did not care if there were any problems between sisters. But now, it was in front of outsiders. How could Chin Huayong not be angry? Looking at Di Yan's face, he knew that Chin Yuru's current behavior made Di Yan very unhappy. Or it could be said that no man would like the woman he was going to marry was not a dignified lady from an aristocratic family, but a shrew. Father, second sister doesn't want to take care of mother, so she deliberately pretended to be injured. Seeing Chin Huayong coming over, Chin Yuru immediately came up to complain. She had already sent someone to inform Chin Huayong about what happened in Madame D's courtyard. Deliberately pretending to be injured? Chin Huayong looked at Chin Wanru, his meaning unclear. General, second miss is really injured, and it is very serious. If you don't believe it, you can ask someone to check. You can't let elder miss frame our second miss. Nanny Yu rushed over from the side and knelt in front of Chin Huayong. She immediately burst into tears. Elder miss insisted that second miss is lying and even smashed the room like this. Second miss promised to let her rest for a day and take care of mother tomorrow, but elder miss still didn't agree. Father, let someone in to check the wound. Chin Wanru looked at the broken pieces on the floor helplessly. Then she raised her eyes. There was a bit of sadness in her watery eyes, but her face was very calm. After saying that, she turned and walked inside. Mei Yan, go in and have a look. Chin Yuru was quite proud of herself. Miss. Mei Yan suddenly panicked. Hurry up and go. Chin Yuru said sternly. Mei Yan could only go into the inner room. Chin Wanru was already sitting on the bed. Chin Yu helped her lift up her skirt, and the bandage on her calf was slowly unwrapped. Some bright red blood had already seeped out. Mei Yan's face turned pale, and her teeth began to chatter, but she dared not say anything. The bandage was unwrapped, and there was a strong smell of blood inside. When the last wound was unwrapped, a wound that was much bigger than Chin Rongji's was revealed. Chin Wanru's calf was already thin, and the wound almost reached half of her calf. It was a bloody mess, and no one knew how deep it was. It seemed that because no medicine was used, when the white bandage was unwrapped, it spread out again. The smell of blood was getting stronger. Chapter 168. Is second miss not hurt? Chin Yuru asked in a hurry when she saw Mei Yan coming out. She looked proud. First miss. Mei Yan stuttered. Her face was still pale and her body was trembling. She looked at Chin Yuru helplessly. Say something. Qin Yuru said sternly when she saw that the situation was not right. Second miss is hurt very, very badly. Mei Yan said with a tremble. She looked at Qin Yuru pitifully. She had to tell the truth. She would know if she sent someone to check. But she also knew the consequences of telling the truth. First miss would not spare her. Her legs went soft and she knelt down with a plop. Anyone could see that she was trembling. Impossible. Qin Yuru was stunned. Then she reacted and said with her eyes wide open. Why not? Qin Wanru held Qin Yu's hand and stood in front of the curtain again. Big sister, if you don't believe me, you can ask more people to check. I'll see for myself. Qin Yuru did not know where she got the temper to not admit defeat. She could not suppress her anger. Enough. Qin Huayong's eyebrows were filled with anger as he shouted. He kicked the chair beside him away. The chair fell to the ground and made a loud thud. Everyone in the room quietened down. Father, Qin Yuru was scared and said timidly. Qin Wanru stood there silently. She held Qin Yu with one hand and her long eyelashes slightly drooped. She did not say anything. Isn't your mother sick? She got injured again this time. Go and take care of her. Qin Huayong said harshly. Father. Qin Yuru was embarrassed to be reprimanded by Qin Huayong in front of Di Yan. Her face turned red and tears overflowed. You will take care of her from now on. Your sister is so badly hurt. Why do you need to take care of her? Qin Huayong understood that this was caused by Madame D and Qin Yuru. Originally, Madame D made a big fuss and said that she was seriously injured. For the sake of Duke Yong's mansion, he tolerated it. After all, it was indeed because of him that Madame D was also injured. But now such a thing happened, and it seemed that Madame D wanted to force his little daughter to death. He couldn't bear this anger. Father, Qin Yuru felt wronged. How could Qin Wanru be so badly hurt? She still could not believe it. Go back quickly. Don't make trouble again. Qin Huayong's eyes were very cold. He was very disappointed with Qin Yuru. He had higher expectations for this daughter of his. Madame D had behaved recklessly and brought up her daughter to be like this. It seemed that he had to discuss with his mother and not let Madame D lead her daughter astray. After being reprimanded by Qin Huayong again and again, Qin Yuru's face was as red as blood. She looked at Qin Huayong and then at Di Yan, who had his head lowered, and burst into tears. She turned around and ran out. She ran a little too fast and accidentally bumped into the corner of a chair that had fallen to the ground. A quick-witted maid quickly helped her, but she pushed the maid away harshly. The maid took a step back and fell to the ground. After pushing away the maid, Qin Yuru covered her face and ran out. Mei Yan, who was kneeling on the ground, hurriedly stood up and chased after her. Nonsense. Qin Huayong said angrily. Uncle, I'll go and see Aunt too. She was badly scalded, and cousin was very concerned about her. Di Yan raised his head and had to take Qin Yuru's side. No matter what, Madame D was his aunt, and he came to Qin's mansion to support Madame D. At this time, although he did not like Qin Yuru's style, he had to take her side. I'm sorry. Qin Huayong sighed deeply. Although his expression was still cold, it had eased a little. Di Yan did not know what to say at this time. After bowing respectfully to Qin Huayong, he also ran out. If he had known that Qin's mansion was in such a mess, he would not have come here. Even he felt ashamed that things had become like this. Whether it was his cousin's sister or aunt, they were not like what he had imagined. Their simple appearance made him feel disgusted. His aunt and cousin sister had cried and complained about their grievances in front of grandma. Di Yan thought that Qin Wanru should be the one crying and complaining the most. Out of the door of Jifang Pavilion, he looked at the intersection and stopped. He was very upset at this time and was not in the mood to comfort Qin Yuru. He turned around and casually walked to the garden. After a few steps, a person suddenly walked out of the roadside in a hurry and happened to bump into Di Yan. Di Yan was impatient when he saw someone bumping into him. His face became stern and he was about to scold him, but he did not expect that the person who was holding his hand to prevent him from falling was Qi Rongji. Qi Rongji steadied herself and saw that the person in front of her was Di Yan. Her face turned red and she hurriedly stepped back. Because of her hurry, her body swayed and she almost fell. Di Yan hurriedly reached out to hold her hand. "Child, where are you going?" Qi Rongji stood still, looked at Di Yan, and asked softly with a red face. "Just taking a walk." Di Yan frowned and put his hand down. He was indeed taking a walk because he did not know what to say to Madame D and Qin Yuru when he returned. "Child, did you come from Sister Wanru's place? How is Sister Wanru's injury?" Seeing that he was not interested, Qi Rongji knew that something must have happened. She rolled her eyes and asked with concern. Seeing the concern on her face, he thought of Mei Yan mentioning that Qin Wanru was seriously injured. Then he thought of Mei Yan saying that Qi Rongji's injury was not serious and Qin Yuru mocked Qi Rongji's words. He felt even more sullen. He felt that Qin Yuru was too arbitrary and a little too much. Qin Wanru was seriously injured, how could Qi Rongji not be seriously injured? She was inexplicably injured, and in the end, she had to be mocked. She did not have high hopes. Thinking of this, his expression softened and he smiled. The doctor is looking at cousin Wanru's injury. She should be fine with some medicine. How is Miss Chi's injury? I'm fine. It's nothing serious. It's just that when my feet touched the ground, it hurt a little. Qi Rongji's feet touched the ground, as if she wanted to walk to show Di Yan, but her feet wobbled and she almost fell again. Her eyebrows were tightly knitted, and it was obvious that she was really in pain. Di Yan quickly reached out to help her, and his eyes fell on her legs. "Does it hurt so much?" "No, it really doesn't hurt. It's just a little inconvenient," Qi Rongji said softly, shaking her head rapidly, as if she was afraid that Di Yan would not believe her. But her hand was holding Di Yan's. In order to support her strength, her whole body almost leaned toward him. A faint fragrance floated over, and it was rich. Di Yan lowered his head, and his eyes fell on her delicate face. His breathing quickened, but he did not push her away. The expression on his face became more and more gentle. "How can you come out to sea in your current condition? Let me help you back." This is not good, is it?" Qi Rongji's face became shy, and she gently pushed Di Yan. "Then I'll watch you go back." Di Yan looked around, and let go of Qi Rongji's hand. He tidied his robe and nodded. It was indeed not convenient. In Jifang Pavilion, Nanny Yu and a few servant girls cleverly cleaned up the room. Qin Huayong sat on the chair in the middle, and Qin Wanru was helped to sit on the chair on the other side. The doctor had already left with the medicine. It was very quiet in the room, and it was so strange that it gave people an indescribable feeling. Nanny Yu stood behind Qin Wanru, looking at the floor in front of her. She was anxious. Although her head was lowered, she could still feel the atmosphere in the room. The two servant girls, Qing Yu and Yujie, had already been moved out. "Wanru, I'm sorry." Qin Huayong's voice was not loud, but it was heavy. He rubbed his temples, feeling a headache coming on. "Father, I don't blame you," Qin Wanru said softly. Her eyes were calm and peaceful, without any of the anger and agitation of Qin Yuru. It was as if she was the older sister, dealing with everything calmly. Taking a deep breath, Qin Huayong raised his head and looked at Qin Wanru. It seemed that he wanted to say something, but he didn't. He paused for a while and said, "From now on, the matters of Yulan Pavilion have nothing to do with you." This meant that Madame D could no longer interfere in Qin Wanru's affairs, nor could she use other reasons to torture Qin Wanru in the name of an elder. Nanny Yu's heart skipped a beat, and she almost jumped up in excitement. This meant that it would be of great benefit to Mississippi, but Duke Yong's mansion, what will happen? Qin Wanru looked a little worried. Di Yan was here today, and he saw it. Even if I don't say anything, I believe that Duke Yong's mansion will not interfere in this matter. Moreover, this is a matter of our inner court. A trace of anger flashed across Qin Huayong's face, but he suppressed it. This was indeed not a good time for him to fall out with Duke Yong's mansion. Thank you, father. Qin Wanru didn't stand on ceremony this time. She stood up with difficulty with the help of the chair, and bowed deeply to Qin Huayong. Then she raised her head, and there was a trace of childish happiness on her face. It could be seen that she was really happy. But in fact, it was not difficult to explain. Anyone who met a person like Madame D would feel tired even if they had to pretend to be obedient. It was the best if they could not get involved with Madame D. But mother has to deal with Madame. But soon the smile on her little face faded. Qin Wanru frowned, and her face was full of worry. Mother is pregnant now. If Madame D deliberately made trouble like what happened in the kitchen, and the target was the people around mother, how could mother rest at ease to raise the baby? The two matters were implicated together without anyone noticing. I have arrangements for your mother. Let the two concubines worry about the following affairs, and your mother only needs to take care of them. Qin Huayong had long thought about this matter. Old grandma was old and in poor health, so she definitely could not take care of the internal affairs. But if Madame D made trouble every day, Shui Rulan's current health couldn't bear it. The two concubines would be the best. They would be in charge of the internal affairs, and Shui Rulan would only be in charge of them. Originally, it was just an idea. After all, he had to take Duke Yong's mansion into consideration. But what happened just now made Qin Huayong decisively make up his mind. Chapter 169. What? Tell me. Qin Huayong said. The two concubines don't have the right to manage the inner court. Qin Wanru bit her lips and said implicitly. Then what should we do? Qin Huayong didn't know what Qin Wanru meant. Based on Madame D's temperament, it was not suitable for her to manage the house now. Without managing the house, she could make all kinds of trouble every day. If she really managed the house, she would turn the whole mansion upside down. Father, in fact, not only the two concubines don't have the right to manage the house, but also my mother. After all, Madame is the legal wife. Qin Wanru raised her long eyelashes and said. He stealthily changed the topic to Shui Rulan. Although the principal wife and secondary wife were both wives, no matter what, the principal wife was still the wife in the most formal sense, and also the most justifiable. In a situation where the principal wife was safe and sound, it was actually unreasonable to let the secondary wife manage the household. Moreover, he was not using the principal wife, but using two concubines. If someone accused Qin Huayong of favoring the concubines and neglecting the wife, there would be another quarrel. After Qin Wanru married Wen Shiqi in her last life, she accompanied him in bed every day. Every time when Shiqi got better, he would tell her some things in the court and what he had seen and heard in the past. Qin Wanru, who was locked in her boudoir in her last life, didn't know these things. Those things opened another side of the world for her. Because of her curiosity, Qin Wanru would always get to the bottom of it. Sometimes, when Shiqi didn't know how to answer her questions. Once, he even jokingly said that if she was a man, she might be able to be an official in the court. Her eagerness to learn might make her better than most people. In her last life, she was far away from the officialdom, but in this life, it seemed to be closer to her. Father, you're a general, so the appointment will definitely come. Even if someone secretly makes some mistakes, it won't be too long. I heard from my grandmother that although the rank of a general is not as high as that of a civil official, he basically won't be dismissed as long as he doesn't make any mistakes. What's more, it is said that you have made great contributions and suppressed the rebels. Qin Wanru put the blame on Madame Dowager. It seemed that Madame Dowager told her everything. She clearly knew that she was still a child. If she was too proficient in politics, or even officialdom, it might not be a good thing in the eyes of others. Abnormality was demonic. If she was too abnormal, it would only make people feel strange, and it might even lead to all kinds of bad guesses. Moderation is the most appropriate way to conduct oneself. Of course it doesn't matter. Moderation didn't mean that one shouldn't stand out. When it was time to stand out, one still had to stand out. When it was time to hide, one still had to hide. These were also taught by Wen Shiqi in the last life. In the last life, Wen Shiqi was like a teacher and a brother to her. Unfortunately, Qin Wanru's reputation was ruined early in the last life, and she was excluded by the noble ladies of aristocratic families, so she had no chance to show her ability. I know. Seeing that his little daughter was so sensible, Qin Huayong didn't hide it. He nodded, and his eyes fell on Qin Wanru. This little daughter, who he had ignored in the past, actually had an extraordinary intelligence. Although it was because of his mother's advice, he still marveled at this child's intelligence. He didn't know when this little daughter of his had become less childish. She had grown into a young lady from an aristocratic family, which surprised even him. He remembered that Madame D often talked about Qin Wanru with a helpless look. Now he thought that it was just Madame D's selfishness. He was ashamed that he also thought that Madame D was right, and had always regarded Qin Wanru as an ignorant little girl who only knew how to make trouble. Since father is in office, according to etiquette, he can ask for a title of honorary lady. Qin Wanru said. Qin Huayong finally heard some key points. He raised his eyebrows and asked, Wanru, do you mean to ask for a title of honorary lady for your mother? Yes. Qin Wanru said bluntly. Madame D had a title of honorary lady. She was a 5th grade official, and Qin Huayong had asked for it when he was the Ningyuan army general. Grandma said that father is likely to be transferred to another position. Since it's a transfer, it's impossible to get a title of honorary lady. In other words, Madame D's title of honorary lady could not be promoted anymore. But I haven't made any contributions, so how can I ask for a title of honorary lady? Qin Huayong frowned, thinking that his little daughter didn't know much about this matter, so he immediately explained. Isn't it said that when a foreign official is transferred to the capital city, he can have a chance to ask for a title of honorary lady? Qin Wanru tilted her head in confusion. That's under the circumstance that there is no title of honorary lady. Madame D now has a title of honorary lady, and I haven't made any contributions, so it's impossible for me to ask for another title of honorary lady. The so-called title of honorary lady is actually just a decoration. Qin Huayong said with a bitter smile. The imperial court set up this title of honorary lady to promote those official wives and family members, but it was impossible to get a title of honorary lady after a transfer. Father, just give it a try. Maybe the Ministry of Rights will approve it. Qin Wanru raised her eyebrows, looked at Qin Huayong expectantly, and said, if you can get the title of honorary lady recognized by the Ministry of Rights, even if you are officially in charge of the family, or if you are not well, you can give the power to the 2 concubines. After all, you will be rewarded by the imperial court. If this was really the case, things in the backyard would indeed be sorted out, and Madame D would no longer find a chance to target Shui Rulan. Even Duke Yong's mansion would not be capricious and blame Shui Rulan. After the Ministry of Rights officially recognized it, the officials in the imperial censorate would have nothing to say. Of course, Qin Huayong was happy to see this result, but after thinking about it, he still felt that it would not work. He was not a person who had made great contributions, so how could he let both his wives get the title of honorary lady? After thinking about it, he looked at Qin Wanru's pure and expectant eyes, and finally didn't refuse. Instead, he nodded and said, okay, I will give it a try. Qin Wanru smiled, and her smile was like a blooming flower. She didn't know where her confidence came from, but she said with certainty, Father, you can definitely do it. If so, of course, it will be the best. Qin Huayong was helpless against his little daughter's blind confidence. He stood up and said, have a good rest first, and go and apply the medicine. Yes, father. Although Qin Wanru's face was pale, she looked good, and her pale smiling face made people feel sorry for her. As she spoke, she held Nanny Yu's hand and was ready to send Qin Huayong out. Qin Huayong hurriedly stopped her. Go back and have a rest, I am leaving, don't send me out again. Then, father, don't forget it. Qin Wanru said and stopped obediently. Okay, I won't forget it. Qin Huayong nodded and strode away. Miss, I think the general doesn't take it to heart. Nanny Yu saw Qin Huayong's expression clearly. After Qin Huayong left, she said uneasily, it seems that the general is just coaxing second Mississippi. If she could really get the title of honorary lady for Madame Shui, it would be a great thing. This meant that even if Madame Shui went to Duke Yong's mansion with Madame D, she would not be suppressed by Madame D. But this was too good, how could it be possible? She was afraid that Qin Wanru would think too well and be too disappointed, so Nanny Yu thought that she had to let her miss be prepared early, and it was better to tell the truth. I know. Qin Wanru smiled slightly, and helped Nanny Yu into the inner room, and sat on the bed. Yujia came in, took off the cloth that she had casually wrapped around her wound, and wrapped the wound with a piece of white silk with ointment on it. These ointment were made by Qin Wanru herself, not those sent by the doctor before. The doctor's medicine was too common, and the effect was not as good as the one she made herself. Since Miss knows, why do you still mention it to the general? Nanny Yu helped her and asked. Only by mentioning it can father know that there is such a thing, and then he will mention it at the right time. Sometimes it is impossible not to mention it, but it is very possible to mention it. Qin Wanru smiled slightly, and said meaningfully. Miss, do you mean to report it to the general first, and when the opportunity comes, the general will naturally mention it? Yujie was a smart girl. Although she did not understand Nanny Yu's question, she could explain it according to her words. Seeing that she clearly didn't know anything, but she explained it so well, even Nanny Yu, who had a lot on her mind, couldn't help but burst into laughter. She gently patted her head and said with a smile, this girl. Nanny, am I wrong? Yujie raised her head and said unwillingly. In the past, Mingqiu Nun often reasoned with her like this, always saying some specious words to make her listen. After a long time, she would also say something that sounded very reasonable, and many things could be connected. Yes, you're right. Looking at this girl's mischievous look, Nanny Yu's tightened heart relaxed, and she could not stop laughing. For a moment, the room became cheerful, and the previous gloominess was swept away. Qin Wanru also smiled and looked at her calf, which was tied up. The injury on her calf was not so painful anymore. Mentioning the honorary title to her father did not mean that her father should immediately go to the emperor to ask for it. She just wanted to imprint this matter in her father's heart, and then add a few things to supplement it, and when the time came, it would naturally happen. Now it sounded like a ridiculous matter, but it might not be really ridiculous. Opportunities could be encountered, and they could also take the initiative to find it. What they needed now was the timing. When Qin Huayong came to Madame D's courtyard, she was still in a rage in the room. The little servant girl who was half kneeling to feed Madame D medicine was thrown in the courtyard, half dead, and her whole body was covered with blood. She was motionless, and no one knew whether she was dead or alive. Qin Huayong rushed into the room, and when he saw Qin Yuru was also there, he said coldly, "Get out." Father. Qin Yuru was complaining to Madame D, and when she saw Qin Huayong come in, she shivered. She did not expect that Qin Huayong would ask her to leave without saying anything, and she could not help but be stunned. Go. Qin Huayong's whole body was emitting cold air, and his eyes were even colder as he looked at his eldest daughter coldly. Chapter 170. What do you want to do now? Qin Huayong's cold eyes fell on Madame D. I don't want to do anything. I'm not well. Who knew they would spill medicine on me? General, I'm the one who got hurt. Madame D cried and showed him her bandaged hands. There were many burns on his hands, and there were also many bandages wrapped around his hands. His eyes fell on Madame D's face. There was a scar on her face and some ointment was applied. Disgust flashed in his eyes. Madame D was getting worse and worse. Let Yuru take care of you when you're sick. Don't bother about Wanru. Qin Huayong said coldly. General, I've raised her for so many years and I'm her elder. Shouldn't I take care of her when she's sick? Madame D wiped her tears and said. She couldn't accept that she didn't torture Qin Wanru this time. It would be a waste if she didn't use such a good opportunity. It was rare for her brother to support her. Madame D didn't want to let it go. You know what you've done. Seeing that Madame D was still so persistent, Qin Huayong was so angry that he rushed to her. With a flash of fierceness in his eyes, he strode over, grabbed Madame D, and pulled her out. He was so strong that Madame D almost fell down. Seeing that the situation was not good, Madame D grabbed the pillar beside her and said, General, what are you doing? I'm taking you back to Duke Yong's mansion. Our Qin's mansion is too small to support you. Qin Huayong pulled hard and Madame D loosened her grip on the pillar. She screamed and rushed to hug Qin Huayong's leg, refusing to let go. General, I'm not being careless. I'm just sick. I just want to see my daughters wrapped around my knees. Who would have thought that Qi Rongji would be so unruly? She actually joined in and made this room into such a mess. Seeing the fierce look in Qin Huayong's eyes, Madame D knew she was in trouble. She hurriedly pushed all the blame to Qi Rongji. She didn't expect that Duke Yong's mansion, which Qin Huayong was afraid of in the past, didn't seem to have such a strong influence on him. She could scare Qin Huayong, but she didn't want to leave Qin's mansion. Qin Huayong's gaze fell on Madame D's face coldly. He lowered his eyes and did not know what he meant. He tightly pursed his lips and did not say a word. General, I really didn't want to do anything. It's really an accident. But I'm hurt, so I'm angry. Seeing that Qin Huayong was gloomy and didn't say a word, Madame D was scared. She hugged Qin Huayong's legs and cried. Qin Huayong's face was still cold. He lifted his leg and kicked Madame D down. She fell heavily on the ground. When her elbow hit the ground, there was even a loud thud. But even so, Madame D couldn't care less about the pain on her elbow. She held Qin Huayong in her arms and begged, General, I won't do this again. I still want to see our daughter marry into a good family and see her enjoy wealth and splendor. Madame D had been married to Qin Huayong for so many years, but this was the first time she saw him so angry. At this time, she naturally did not dare to contradict him and lead him in the direction of pleasing him. You still want to see your daughter enjoy wealth? Qin Huayong picked Madame D up from the ground. He held her clothes. His eyes were cold. At this moment, Madame D was really panicking. She subconsciously pulled Qin Huayong's hand and tried hard to let go of his hand. The clothes around her neck were pulled up tightly and she felt suffocated. She found it difficult to breathe and her face turned red, but she could not say a word. At this moment, she seemed to see the murderous look in Qin Huayong's eyes. He tried hard to make a sound, but because the clothes around his neck were locked, he couldn't say a word. He could only struggle with great difficulty, like a dried fish that had jumped onto the shore, desperately jumping but unable to jump out no matter how hard he tried. Madame D's face turned red, her eyes widened, and cold sweat broke out on her forehead. She tried to support herself with her feet on the ground and held Qin Huayong's hand tightly with both hands. The scene in front of her blurred. The next moment, her neck loosened and her throat was immediately cleared. Madame D fell heavily on the ground. She covered her chest with her hands and coughed hard as if she was going to cough her lungs out. The air that rushed into her mouth made her feel as if she had come back to life again. Even though this feeling made her cough uncontrollably, her face was covered in tears and mucus. The ointment had been washed away, and thick brown liquid slid down her face like a brown tear. It was strange and embarrassing. Hire an etiquette instructor from the palace to teach Yuru. If she still acts like this, it's useless. Qin Huayong's cold voice was right beside her ear. This kind of cold feeling was not the voice of Qin Huayong in her memory. Madame D was really scared. She trembled and covered her chest with her hands and took 2 steps back to keep a distance from Qin Huayong. Do I remember I told you before? Qin Huayong looked down at Madame D. Memories of the past rushed to Madame D's mind. The flush on her face faded and turned pale. Both her hands were trembling. No, remember what you said. Qin Huayong snorted and glanced at Madame D. He turned and strode away. Qin Yuru was still guarding outside. She wanted to rush in when she heard the strange sound inside. But she was held back by the old maid beside her. When the door opened, she rushed over and saw Qin Huayong's cold face. She was so scared that she stopped in her tracks. Qin Huayong didn't look at Qin Yuru and went straight to the courtyard. Seeing him leave, Qin Yuru rushed into the room. She saw Madame D falling to the ground with panic in her eyes. She looked pale and embarrassed. She was looking at a spot in the air and was trembling. Mother, what's wrong with you? Qin Yuru rushed over and helped Madame D up. Madame D turned her dull eyes. After a while, she seemed to recognize Qin Yuru. She hugged Qin Yuru and immediately burst into tears. At this moment, she felt like she was revived. Mother, what's wrong with you? Are you okay? Qin Yuru panicked. She had never seen Madame D like this. For a moment, her eyes turned red and she was angry and hateful. At this time, Nanny Zhou also came in. The 2 of them worked together to help Madame D to the bed in the inner room and ask someone to change her clothes. When everything was done, Madame D came back to her senses. She half leaned on the bed and held Qin Yuru's hand, unwilling to let go. Mother, are you okay? Qin Yuru handed the wet towel in her hand to Nanny Zhou and carefully looked at Qin Yuru's face. I'm fine. Madame D looked down with a cold face and slowly released her hand from Qin Yuru's hand. Go back first. I have something to say to Nanny Zhou. Mother, I'm worried. I don't want to leave. Qin Yuru still sat on the bed and said. Go. I'm fine now. I'll find you an etiquette instructor in the palace in a few days and let her teach you the rules in the capital city. Madame D said slowly. Mother. Qin Yuru was shocked. She didn't know why she mentioned this at this time. Nanny Zhou, let first miss go back. Madame D closed her eyes and said weakly. The scene just now was like a replay in her mind, and some things that she had almost forgotten came to her mind. First miss, you go back first. Madame is not in the mood to talk to you now. Let me talk to her. Nanny Zhou knew what Madame D meant and gently persuaded Qin Yuru. But mother is like this now. Qin Yuru said worriedly. First miss, I'm here. Don't worry. Nanny Zhou said again. Hearing her words, Qin Yuru saw that Madame D closed her eyes tightly and didn't want to talk to her. Qin Yuru stood up helplessly and bit her lip. She looked at Madame D and decided to leave. Yuru, don't make trouble these days. Don't provoke Shui Rulin or Qin Wanru. Madame D suddenly said. Mother. Qin Yuru didn't know what Madame D meant and called her in a low voice. Go. Madame D waved her hand and Qin Yuru had no choice but to step back. Her mother's words today were incoherent and she couldn't grasp the main point. She stood in the corridor and thought for a while but couldn't think of anything. She gritted her teeth and vented all her anger on Qin Wanru. As long as there was a chance, she would definitely make that bitch pay back 100 times, 1,000 times. Where is the heir? She suddenly thought of Di Yen and asked. The heir went out with First Mississippi, didn't he come back? Mei Yen said timidly. Seeing that it was her reply, Qin Yuru stretched out her hand and gave her a hard slap. She pointed at the little maid who was lying motionless in the courtyard and no one dared to pay attention to. She said, "See? If there is a next time, this will be your ending." Qin Yuru's vicious voice was so cold that Mei Yan knelt down in fear. She trembled and kowtowed hard on the ground a few times. "First miss, I won't dare to do it again. I won't dare to do it again." Qin Yuru snorted coldly and ignored her. She stepped on her hand and turned to walk out of the courtyard. Mei Yan was in excruciating pain but she didn't dare to say a word. She just looked at the cracking sound coming from her finger. It was so painful that she almost wanted to scream, but she swallowed it forcefully. "Nanny Zhou, have you found the seal?" In the room, Madame D slowly opened her gloomy eyes and asked after Qin Yuru left. "Madam, I didn't find it." What should we do?" Nanny Zhou had searched for it several times but couldn't find it. Now that Madame D asked again, she could only say helplessly, "Forget it if you can't find it. Just go and print another one and make it old," Madame D said coldly. Blood flashed in her eyes, just like when she was almost strangled to death by Qin Huayong and her eyes couldn't see clearly. "Madam, what's the use of it? You didn't particularly want it in the past." Nanny Zhou lowered her voice and gasped. She really didn't understand what was the use of it. In the past, Madame didn't care so much about it. Otherwise, she wouldn't have thrown it away so casually. What was not important in the past is very important now. Madame D lowered her head and clenched her fists tightly. The feeling of dying seemed to be right in front of her. Chapter 171. The magnificent palace, the tall Dan K, not only shone with golden light, but also the noble atmosphere of the royal family. Many people came to the Empress Dowager's Palace of Benevolence and Peace today, but they were all scattered in the garden of the Empress Dowager's Palace of Benevolence and Peace. The Palace of Benevolence and Peace was the main palace of the Imperial Palace, second only to the Emperor and the Empress. Many young ladies of aristocratic families were dressed very beautifully. Each of them was shy and elegant. Although they said they were enjoying the scenery, they were very careful when they moved, as if they were being appreciated. But in fact, they were indeed being appreciated. Although it was not said clearly, the young ladies who entered the palace knew that this time, they were probably going to choose the prince's wives, concubines, and so on. Therefore, they all blushed. Just now, some of them had seen Prince Yu and Prince Shou. The two princes looked extraordinarily handsome. Thinking that as long as they could marry them, not only was there hope for glory and splendor, but also the possibility of becoming the noblest among the women in the future, it made them very excited. Thinking of this, they became more and more shy. Everyone was well aware of the purpose of today's visit, but they pretended to know nothing, afraid that the princes would look down on them. "Grandmother, I don't like it." Chu Luchan casually raised his eyes, leaned back, and said weakly. There was a leopard cat with long snow-white fur on his knee. Its pair of blue cat eyes looked particularly attractive, and there seemed to be a slit in the middle, revealing a mysterious beauty. At this time, it was also lying lazily in his arms, and the whole cat body was nestled in his arms. There are so many young ladies of aristocratic families, and they are all the noblest in the capital. Why don't you like it? The Empress Dowager, who was over 60 years old, sat beside him, touched her grandson's forehead, and said with a kind smile. The two of them were in a tall building in the Palace of Benevolence and Peace. The balcony outside was hung with a curtain, which could not only block the wind, but also let the sun shine in. Moreover, it did not affect the line of sight, so it was an excellent place to observe. This building wasn't too high above the ground, so they could see clearly. Not only were the figures of those delicate young ladies from aristocratic families visible, but even their appearances could be seen clearly. Just now, the Empress Dowager had seen quite a few beautiful young ladies and was very satisfied with them. "Imperial grandmother, with my body, who would want to marry me?" Chu Luchan said with a bitter smile. A pair of handsome eyes, like the reflection of stars in the sky, with a harmless weakness. Just one look made the Empress Dowager's heart soften, and she wanted to give all the good things to him. This child had a hard life. What nonsense are you talking about? My grandson is a man of gold and jade. How can there be no one to marry? Not only will there be someone to marry, but he will also marry the best one. If anyone doesn't like you, I will have her punished. The Empress Dowager deliberately said with a stern face. Imperial grandmother, if she marries me, she will become a widow, so Dawn, she will emperor. Grandmother, if she marry and will make her, family, and family. Will. Emmental Dowager will, and will Dow. What kind of words are these? Who said that? My good grandson should live a long life. The Empress Dowager was really angry this time. She frowned and said coldly. Imperial grandmother, do you believe this? Chu Luchen tried hard to smile. He was as handsome as a young man who had walked out of a painting. He had a kind of gloomy weakness, but he always involuntarily aroused the affection of others. Especially his eyes, which were like the starry sky, pure without any impurities. Chen, don't think like this. Grandmother and your uncle will definitely cure you. We will never let this happen. Although it sounded weak, the Empress Dowager still tried to promise her grandson, and the sadness in her heart surged like a tide. The current emperor was her son, and the former emperor was also her son. Chu Luchen didn't say anything this time. He gently touched the white cat on his knee and said, Imperial grandmother, they didn't come for me, did they? He looked very calm, as if he was talking about someone else's business. His long, fan-like eyelashes fell down quietly. When he sat quietly, he was like a painting, an expressionless portrait. The Empress Dowager was very sad. Her eyes fell on those misses from aristocratic families outside. Just now, she found all of them pleasing to the eye, but now they all became unpleasant to the eye. She would not forget that Chu Luchen was a little interested in them and specially looked at a few of them. But since Chu Luyue and Chu Liuzhou passed by, his expression became gloomy, and he no longer seemed to be in high spirits. When Chu Luyue and Chu Liuzhou walked past, those dignified and elegant women all smiled like flowers. Many of them peeped at them through the handkerchiefs in their hands. Their eyes were fixed on them, and they couldn't wait to stop them. Some outstanding ones even deliberately made some accidents to attract the attention of Chu Luyue and Chu Liuzhou. They were really rude. How could such a woman want to enter the royal family? None of them can do. I will choose a better one for you next time. Although the Empress Dowager's face was not very good, she was still gentle to Chu Luchen. Imperial grandmother, I don't want them. I want to raise another cat, just like this one. Chu Liuchen's hand caressed the cat in his hand and said softly. But there is only one cat. The Empress Dowager said softly. This cat was a tribute from a foreign country. At that time, there were 2 sent here. Because he liked them, they were all sent to Prince Chen's mansion. He didn't expect that he couldn't raise one, and only this one was left. It was very precious. Imperial grandmother. Chu Luchen raised his eyes and looked at the Empress Dowager. Okay, as you wish. Anything is fine. Seeing his eyes, the Empress Dowager immediately softened and wanted to ask if there was another cat over there. Imperial grandmother, I will go back first. When you came to me just now, I didn't take the medicine. Chu Luchen seemed to be a little embarrassed and said with a little shyness. This child, he is already so big, but he is still so naive. Since you don't like them, go back first. Next time, I will choose a better miss from an aristocratic family for you. The Empress Dowager said with distress. This time, she also felt that the girls outside were a little too frivolous. Originally, she wanted to choose a good one for Chu Luchen and ask someone to take good care of him. Unexpectedly, when they saw Prince Yu and Prince Shou, they couldn't wait to stick to them. It was really annoying. Her good grandson was so good, how could she let these women look down on him? Yes, Imperial Grandmother. Chu Luchen nodded and leaned back. Xiao Xuanzi understood and pushed him to the stairs. When they reached the stairs, Chu Luchen got off the wheelchair and walked down the stairs slowly. Xiao Xuanzi carried the wheelchair down and put it flat before he sat down. Then he let Xiao Xuanzi push him to leave through the side door. Chu Luchen walked very quietly, not being discovered by the misses in the Palace of Benevolence and Peace who were admiring flowers, or waiting to be admired. When he walked out of the side door of the Palace of Benevolence and Peace, he raised the corner of his eyes, and the gentleness and harmlessness in his eyes faded, revealing a trace of coldness. Where did she go to play? She went to the street. I asked her. It seems that second miss wants to buy a shop, but she doesn't have much money at the moment, so she wants to borrow some money from the bank by mortgaging the new shop. Xiao Xuanzi knew who he was asking about and answered hurriedly. Go and have a look. Chu Luchen touched the white cat in his hand and said lightly. Yes, I will take you to have a look. Xiao Xuanzi answered hurriedly. Qin Wanru didn't know that her whereabouts had been tracked by Chu Luchen. She was indeed outside at the shop that she had taken a fancy to before. Today was the day she had chosen. Madame D and Qin Yuru had been very quiet recently, so there was basically no trouble in the mansion. Not only the shop owner, young Master Su, but also when Shichi was in the shop. On Qin Wanru's side, Nanny Dong was also standing on the side with all the necessary things. The two sides had reached an agreement, and the next step was to be the guarantor. When Shichi was also very helpless about Qin Wanru's inexplicable trust. In fact, he didn't want to care about this kind of thing at all, but when he saw Qin Wanru's little face with a little expectation, he couldn't help but soften his heart. She was just a girl who had not grown up yet. Although she looked young, she seemed to be very smart. Even when Shichi's good friend, young Master Su, kept praising her in private. He said that second Miss Qin had a sharp eye and liked when Shichi at first sight. It was indeed the best to let him be the guarantor. When Shichi, who was born in the left Prime Minister's mansion, was famous for being young and promising in the capital city. However, it was said that he was indifferent, otherwise, with his talent and learning, he would have become an official early. However, young Master Su didn't expect that a person like him would agree to be the guarantor for a girl he had just met. He was also very surprised. Although he didn't think that Qin Wanru would lie, when Shichi's behavior still greatly surprised him. Now that the shop had changed owners, he didn't plan to leave and just watched the fun. Anyway, his ornaments and embroidery ribbons hadn't been sold yet, so it was natural for him to sit here. Could it be that the gifted scholar and the beautiful lady had taken a fancy to him? But this was a little too small. The shopkeeper of the bank was invited over. After Qin Wanru signed her name, she pressed her fingerprint and then pushed the file in her hand to Wen Shichi. Just now, they had read everything, and Qin Wanru also raised some questions she didn't understand. Perhaps because she had asked Wen Shichi a lot of questions in her last life, it was very natural for her to raise questions now. Wen Shichi took it and his eyes fell on the file. There was a small fingerprint on it. It was so small that he couldn't help raising his eyes and smiling slightly. It was really interesting that such a young girl could imitate others to press her fingerprint. However, with this shop as the foundation, no one was worried that she would suddenly run away. Moreover, she was the daughter of Qin Huayong, the Ningyuan army general of Jiangzhou, who was newly in the capital city. However, he heard that there seemed to be some problems with this daughter's background. With this question in mind, he gently pressed his finger on the ink on the side, and then pressed his fingerprint on the paper. Then, he signed his name. He raised his head and handed the file to the shopkeeper of the bank. Chapter 172. When Shichi glanced at Qin Wanru calmly and raised his eyebrows. Give it to this young master. Qin Wanru pointed at young Master Su sitting beside her and said. Young Master Su, please come with me. The shopkeeper stood up with a smile. Since the business was settled, he naturally had to leave. With the guarantee of Prime Minister's some procedures could be saved and there was no need to do more verification. Then I'll go over first. Young Master Su actually didn't want to leave. He seemed to be a little interested, but he had to go, so he could only say to Wen Shiqi. Wen Shiqi waved his hand and nodded. Thank you, young Master Wen. I'll use tea instead of wine to toast you. Qin Wanru stood up with a smile, poured herself a cup of tea and bowed deeply. She was young, and now she was imitating an adult's manner of serving tea, which made her look childishly cute. Her big eyes were bright and lively, and she was very likable. You're welcome. Wen Shiqi said, but he reached out to take the cup of tea and took a sip. Young Master Wen, do you have any brothers in your mansion? Qin Wanru sat down again and asked as if she was just chatting. Her long, fan-like eyelashes fluttered twice, and there was a light smile on her face. I have 2 brothers. Wen Shiqi answered gently. He didn't look down on Qin Wanru because of her small stature and didn't take her seriously. Is your brother the same age as 3rd young Master Wen? Qin Wanru asked curiously with a bit of childishness. This was completely opposite to her calm appearance when she dealt with affairs just now. It seemed that she was a child at this time, smiling and not caring at all. Even for some private affairs of others, she was not very polite and even asked about some private affairs of others. A few years older. Wen Shiqi said vaguely. Are your brothers married? Qin Wanru asked more and more questions that suited her current appearance. My eldest brother is married, but my second brother hasn't. Wen Shiqi felt that he shouldn't answer her, but when he saw her eyes that could almost speak, he couldn't help saying it. His eyes fell on her pink and tender face, and his eyes were soft. The girl in front of him seemed to overlap with the image of his little sister in his memory. At that time, his little sister also asked about this and that curiously. A trace of pain flashed in his eyes. His eyelids drooped slightly. If his sister was still here, would she be like this? So obedient and sensible. Why doesn't 3rd young Master Wen's second brother get married? Don't people get married early in the capital city? Qin Wanru didn't seem to realize that her words were becoming more and more impolite. Second brother can't choose a good marriage. Wen Shiqi didn't know how to answer. Why can't I choose? Is it because there are too many people who want to marry into your family, or is it because he doesn't like the young ladies of other families? Qin Wanru's words were actually not in line with her current age. She had reached the age of 11, and some early girls could choose their husbands now. But because she was young, she had a big advantage. When others saw her now, they basically thought she was under the age of 10. For some mistakes, they just thought she was not sensible. Second brother has always been arrogant and doesn't like ordinary girls. Wen Shiqi said casually and didn't want to continue this topic. 3rd young Master Wen, do you have a cousin who grew up with you? Qin Wanru tilted her head to look at him and suddenly changed the topic. Her question made Wen Shiqi silent for a while. He did have a cousin who grew up with him, but she didn't grow up with him. She was raised in their mansion. She was his aunt's daughter, Gu Shishu. His uncle went to the capital city to be an official. His aunt was worried that her daughter would suffer at a young age, so she raised Gu Shishu in his eldest brother's mansion. Cousin Shu was raised in our mansion. Wen Shiqi thought for a while and said casually. This cousin who was the same age as him looked gentle, but Wen Shiqi didn't like her inexplicably. 3rd young Master Wen, is it popular in the capital city for a cousin to marry a cousin? Does your second brother fall in love with your cousin? That's why he hasn't married yet. Qin Wanru seemed to be curious about cousin Shu again, so she took the opportunity to bring up the topic. Wen Shiqi didn't know how she came to this conclusion and looked at her speechlessly for a moment. I must have guessed it right? Qin Wanru patted the table gently and her watery eyes became more and more lively. You didn't guess it right. Wen Shiqi didn't want to answer her, but when he saw her beaming with joy as if she had guessed it right, he couldn't help but pour cold water on her. How could I not guess it right? It must be right. Third young master 1, you're not your second brother. How can you know what he thinks? Maybe your second brother thinks so he delayed the marriage. Qin Wanru pursed her red lips and said disapprovingly. His words were so arbitrary that Wen Shiqi was speechless. How did this child come up with such a magical conclusion? Second elder brother doesn't like cousin Shu at all. He once told me that a man doesn't need to get married so early and that marriage isn't urgent. He also gave me an example of a cousin getting married. He remembered that second elder brother said that even if they are childhood sweethearts, there is no need to be so urgent. Wen Shiqi thought. Thinking of this, Wen Shiqi's heart skipped a beat and he frowned. Third young master 1, you look so preoccupied. Could it be that you and your second brother have taken a fancy to the same cousin? Qin Wanru suddenly said in surprise. She opened her eyes widely and looked at Wen Shiqi in astonishment. Second Miss Qin, you think too much. Wen Shiqi said slowly after a while. No. That's impossible. That's what it says in the storybook. Qin Wanru murmured in confusion. Then, she tilted her head to look at Wen Shiqi. Third young master 1, isn't it said that 2 brothers fell in love with a cousin, and then they had a dispute and fought with each other secretly? Then the cousin stirred up trouble, and one of them killed the other in the end? Wen Shiqi really didn't know what to say at this time. Was Jiangzhou so lax in controlling the misses from aristocratic families? How could they let such a miss in boudoir read this casually written storybook for fun? Third young master 1, what's written in this book is true. When we were in Jiangzhou, such a thing happened. It seemed that a seemingly weak cousin was seducing the eldest cousin on one side and the second cousin on the other. She looked very innocent. Later, the eldest cousin pushed the second cousin into the river and drowned because of her. Qin Wanru took advantage of her young age to talk nonsense and make up stories casually. There are so many things in Jiangzhou. Wen Shiqi felt that Qin Huayong was an extremely incompetent father. A good girl didn't read some books to understand things but read nonsense. In fact, even if she read this kind of storybook, he didn't think it was a big deal. But was it really good for her to say such things to a man so casually? Second Miss Qin, since the matter of the bank has been settled, I have something to do, so I'll leave first. Wen Shiqi stood up and said with a gentle smile. What about your cousin? Didn't you tell me? Qin Wanru also stood up with a grievance. The corner of Wen Shiqi's eyes twitched. He felt that his self-restraint was so good that he would act as a guarantor for this little girl who talked nonsense. Go back and read some books. Don't think about these things. He blurted out with a gentle rebuke. Then what books should I read? Qin Wanru looked confused. Wen Shiqi felt that he wanted to lose his temper, not to Qin Wanru, but to Qin Wanru's father, the Ningyuan army general of Jiangzhou. How could he neglect his daughter to such an extent? Such a lovely girl didn't even know what books to read. If you want to read books, I have a few that are more suitable for you. Wen Shiqi said, and then he frowned. Previously, he wanted to stay away from this girl who looked too naive. Why did he suddenly want to give her a few books? Thank you, third young master 1. Qin Wanru was overjoyed. Originally, she wanted to get close to Wen Shiqi and remind him to be careful of his second brother and his cousin, Gu Shishu. She also saw that Wen Shiqi didn't take her words seriously, so she needed to remind him from time to time. Wen Shiqi was a very smart person. If it weren't for his second brother Wen Xian and cousin Gu Shishu in his last life, he wouldn't have fallen ill and died early. In her previous life, she had occasionally heard about this from Wen Shiqi's manservant. Wen Shiqi was pushed into the water by his second brother, Wen Xian, and almost lost his life. Later, it was found that someone had tampered with the medicinal herbs, which almost killed Wen Shiqi. Although he was saved later, he was only hanging on to his last breath. The reason was that Wen Xian, who looked gentle and weak, had been in love with each other before. Later, she felt that Wen Shiqi was more promising and good-looking, so she fell in love with Wen Shiqi. However, she pretended that Wen Shiqi had to like her, putting her in a dilemma and asking Wen Xian to marry someone else. In a rage, Wen Xian plotted against Wen Shiqi. Although Wen Shiqi was extremely intelligent and knowledgeable, he didn't expect that his second brother would plot against him, so he fell into the trap. When the servant said that, he also guessed that the matter of the medicinal materials being exchanged should also have something to do with second young master and cousin Mississippi. However, no matter how he explained it to Wen Shiqi didn't allow him to investigate further. Looking at Wen Shiqi's receding figure, Qin Wanru took a deep breath, and the innocence in her eyes slowly spread out, revealing a trace of seriousness. Chapter 173. She didn't know when Chu Luqian appeared beside her. He looked at her coldly with a faint smile on his handsome face, which made people feel cold. Qin Wanru's eyes fell on a very conspicuous thing in his hand. Her watery eyes met a pair of blue cat eyes. After being stunned for a moment, she found that it was a white cat with blue eyes. It looked very cute, soft and chubby, and very beautiful. It was an extremely beautiful cat. Qin Wanru was sure that she had never seen it before, but it was inexplicably familiar. It seemed that there was such a cat in her memory. Was this something in her previous life? But after thinking about it carefully, she couldn't find the trace of this cat. This cat is... Qin Wanru hesitated. Hold it for me. Chu Luqian snorted coldly and threw the cat to Qin Wanru's arms. Qin Wanru hurriedly reached out to take it. The cat was very soft and comfortable to hold. Qin Wanru's hand involuntarily touched it, but the cat stared at Qin Wanru with a pair of beautiful blue eyes as if it was facing a formidable enemy. It even stretched out its claws. Chu Luqian's hand heavily patted on the back of the cat. The cat howled and turned to Chu Luqian with a sad cry. It didn't bare its teeth and claws at Qin Wanru, but lazily softened and nestled in Qin Wanru's arms. It didn't look hostile anymore. Xiao Xuanzi looked at his master and then looked at Qin Wanru. Suddenly he smiled more brightly. After bowing to Qin Wanru enthusiastically, he specially said, "Second miss, this cat likes to be touched. It will be happy when touched." Was it like this? Qin Wanru felt quite suspicious. It seemed to be very fierce when she touched it just now. But it was quite cute now. After thinking about it, she couldn't help but reach out to touch its back again. The cat made a purr sound, which sounded very comfortable. Its eyes, which were staring at Qin Wanru just now, closed comfortably. Under the white fur, it looked very cute. "Child, why are you here?" Qin Wanru sat down with the cat in her arms. The cat was quite heavy. At first glance, she knew it was well raised. "Qin Wanru, I didn't expect you to be so scheming at such a young age." Chu Luqian squinted at her with a face full of displeasure. "Your Highness, what happened to me?" Qin Wanru carefully touched the soft hair of the cat and said. She hadn't seen this man for a while. What was he thinking of this time? "You like Wen Shiqi? Do you want me to be your matchmaker?" Chu Luqian's lips curved slightly, and there was a glimmer of light in his black eyes that Qin Wanru could not understand. "Child, am I still so young?" Qin Wanru raised her head helplessly, hoping that Chu Luqian could see clearly. "She can be a child bride for now. She will be fine after she grows up." Chu Luqian's eyes were shimmering. He looked Qin Wanru up and down in disgust and suddenly suggested. "Aren't only children from poor families willing to become child brides?" Qin Wanru said helplessly. She didn't know what she had done to annoy this man, who seemed to find trouble with her everywhere. If your status is far lower than the man's, you can also be a child bride. Chu Luqian touched his chin and suddenly felt that this was really a feasible plan. "I actually don't want to be a child bride at all." Qin Wanru cried bitterly in her heart. "Qin Wanru, you know you owe me your life, right?" Chu Luqian suddenly laughed. He was handsome and elegant, and the coldness in his eyes was gone. At this time, he even looked her up and down playfully, which made Qin Wanru feel cold all over. She didn't know what this temperamental Prince Chen wanted to do. Your Highness, thank you for saving my life. Qin Wanru stood up helplessly and bowed to him. This Prince Chen was the person she couldn't understand the most. Other people seemed to have traces, but this one's mood and behavior had always been unconstrained, completely different from ordinary people's thinking. Seeing her become nervous, just like the cat just now, Chu Luchen felt very satisfied. He raised his eyebrows and said, "What do you think? Don't want to be a child bride in Deputy Prime Minister's mansion?" "I don't want to." Qin Wanru refused without thinking. Although she would repay Wen Shiqi's kindness, she didn't plan to devote herself to him, or in other words, she didn't plan to get married. In her last life, although she married Wen Shiqi, they were just teachers and friends, but not husband and wife. Even when Wen Shiqi died, he repeatedly told her that she could remarry in the future and didn't need to stay with him anymore. You really don't want to? Qin Wanru, you have to think about it. If I promise you, it will basically be done, and I won't give my promise easily. Chu Luchen said slowly. Qin Wanru pursed her small cherry lips and shook her head without any hesitation. Your Highness, thank you for your kindness. You really don't want to go? Chu Luchen asked with a smile. Qin Wanru didn't know why he insisted on this, but she shook her head again. Then don't you want to be a child bride in Deputy Prime Minister's mansion? Then go to another mansion. Chu Luchen said helplessly. Qin Wanru had a sense of danger, so she hurriedly shook her head and refused. Your Highness, you must be joking. I don't want to be a child bride in any mansion. She didn't know why Chu Luchen was so interested in helping her solve her lifelong problem. In fact, it's good to be a child bride. You can buy shops when you want and slap people when you want. You don't need to worry about the madam in your mansion making trouble for you. You can also make your father respectful to you and not embarrass you for your sister. You can even protect your mother who has remarried. Chu Luchen said with a smile. Qin Wanru was shocked, and there was a little sweat on her forehead. She blinked her charming and innocent eyes, bit her lips and shook her head again. There was no such good thing in this world. Everything had a price, and she was very clear about the price. She couldn't afford it, and she was not willing to pay it. Your Highness, how do you know that I want to buy shops? Qin Wanru bit her lips and wanted to change the topic. I saw it when I walked here. Why? You really don't want to think about it? Chu Luchen suddenly felt that it was very feasible. Your Highness, I really don't want to think about it. Although Qin Wanru was annoyed, she still had to smile and say. Think about it? Ha! Chu Luchen suddenly stood up, reached out to take the cat away from Qin Wanru's arms, and then turned to leave. Xiao Xuanzi followed him closely. Qin Wanru looked at her empty arms in astonishment, and then looked at Chu Liuchen's back, feeling that her brain was not enough to understand it. What did he come here for? Miss, I have seen Prince Chen before, in Jingshin Monastery. Yu Jie wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. He went to Mingqiu Nun to see him. Qin Wanru sat down again. The cat was really comfortable when she held it, but now it was gone, so she was not used to it. It was the master of Jingshin Monastery who treated Prince Chen, and the master of Jingshin Monastery told me not to tell others. Since she had started, it was not difficult to say the next words. How is his illness? Qin Wanru asked. It was not difficult to guess that Chu Luchen asked the master of Jingshin Monastery to treat him. It seems that the illness brought from the womb is very difficult to cure. If it is not treated properly, it will hurt his life. But the master said something about protecting him, and I didn't understand it at that time. Yu Jie said. What protection? Qin Wanru didn't quite understand. I am not very clear about this. It seems to be a person, but it also seems that there is medicine to protect him. Yu Jie thought for a while and said. She was standing outside the room of the master of Jingshin Monastery at that time, so she didn't hear much. Later the master of Jingshin Monastery closed the door, so she didn't hear anything else. Later the master of Jingshin Monastery told her not to say this, and also told her not to tell Mingqiu Nun, because this distinguished guest might ask Mingqiu Nun to treat him. She was afraid that Mingqiu Nun would refuse, so she had to find an opportunity to say it tactfully. But in the end, Mingqiu Nun didn't do anything. While they were talking, young Master Su, who had finished dealing with things, came back. Seeing that when Shichi was not here, he didn't want to stay any longer, so he said goodbye to Qin Wanru and left. This shop and everything in it now belonged to Qin Wanru. After looking up and down and putting forward some suggestions for improvement, Qin Wanru went back to General's mansion. Nanny Dong stayed and asked Qin Wanru to go back and tell Dong Xiu'er that she would live here these days and wouldn't go back to Qin's mansion. She asked Dong Xiu'er to stay here and not to worry. After Qin Wanru returned to her room, she asked Nanny Yu to summon Dong Xiu'er. Dong Xiu'er came quickly. Qin Wanru just sat down and took a sip of tea, and she came. She first bowed to Qin Wanru in a well-behaved manner, and then stood aside, looking respectful and polite. She came with Nanny Dong. Although she also lived in Qin Wanru's Zhifang pavilion, she was not Qin Wanru's servant, and there was nothing for her to do. Every day, she would embroider lace and sew small accessories like toggle and loop buttons in the room. Her hands were very skillful and she was also kind. Gradually, the servant girls in the yard became familiar with her. Of course, among them, Qing Shui was the closest to her. As a principal servant girl, Qing Shui didn't have much to do, so she went to chat with Dong Xiu'er when she was free. "Is your leg better?" Qin Wanru looked at Dong Xiu'er's leg and asked gently. She hadn't seen her for several days. Now, when she came in, although she walked in a hurry, she didn't show any leg disease, so she should be almost recovered. "Thank you, Second Mississippi. If it weren't for you, my leg wouldn't have recovered. I will repay you even if I have to work like an ox or a horse in the future." Hearing Qin Wanru's question, Dong Xiu'er raised her head and said gratefully, "You're welcome. Since your mother is helping me with everything in the shop, it's my duty to help you." Qin Wanru smiled slightly. Her eyes fell on Dong Xiu'er's delicate face, and then turned to her black hair. It could be seen that Dong Xiu'er was living a good life, and she even wore a beaded hairpin on her head. "My shop has been taken over. These days, your mother is very busy and will live in the shop outside. She won't come back to stay at night. Your mother asked me to tell you this." "Second Miss, my mother told me before she left." "Second Miss, I want to ask you something, but I don't know if I should ask you." Dong Xiu'er hesitated and peeked at Qin Wanru's face. "Second Miss, mother told me before she left." Chapter 174. Xiu'er thinks that Qing Shui is very dexterous with her hands. Can I ask her to make some ornaments like toggle and loop buttons and embroidery? Mother said that after the new shop opens, there will be a lack of such things. I'm afraid that I can't do it alone. Xiu said. Is Qing Shui's craftsmanship good? Qin Wanru asked with a smile. Qing Shui's craftsmanship is really good, and her needlework is also very good. If she can do it with Xiu-er, it will be even better. Dong Xiu-er thought that Qin Wanru had agreed, so she was overjoyed and said. Nanny Yu looked at Dong Xiu-er unhappily and coughed in a low voice. She turned to Qin Wanru and said seriously, Miss, Dong Xiu-er is your principal servant girl. It's not like we don't have enough food in our mansion. We need your principal servant girl to work to support the family. How will others think of you in our mansion? The identity of a personal principal servant girl of a miss from an aristocratic family was similar to that of a miss from a rich family. If her family was not in decline, she would not go out to work to support the family. Her words made Dong Xiu-er's face turn red. She lowered her head and said, Second Miss, it's all my fault. If you are still in the mansion, let Qing Shui help you first. Qin Wanru comforted her with a smile. After all, Nanny Dong and Dong Xiu were not from the Qin's mansion. When the shop was almost finished, they would move out. On the one hand, they could come and go freely. On the other hand, it was convenient to manage the shop. Yes, second miss. Dong Xiu said obediently, and then left. Miss, what does Qing Shui want to do? Qing Yu frowned and said after watching Dong Xiu's back disappear. She had an intuition that it was about Dong Xiu. She must feel that she can't stay here anymore. Qin Wanru said slowly. She saw clearly the hairpin on Dong Xiu's head just now. It was not an ordinary thing. Nanny Dong was so poor at that time that it was impossible for her to have such a thing. Even now, it was impossible for Nanny Dong to have it. This was the most fashionable style in the capital city, not an old thing brought from Jiangzhou. Up to now, he had only given Nanny Dong some daily necessities. It was impossible for him to have so much extra money to buy such a fashionable hairpin for Dong Xiu. So, the hairpin could only be from Qing Shui. After Qing Shui arrived in the capital, she hadn't gone out of the mansion even once. Unexpectedly, she had such a hairpin in her hand. It seemed that she and Madame D were secretly in touch. She picked up the cup of tea beside her and took a sip. Nanny Yu, send Qing Shui to ask grandmother when the etiquette instructor will arrive. Let Qing Shui ask. Nanny Yu said uneasily. Only then did she realize that something was wrong with Qing Shui. How could she still ask her to do something at this time? Yes, let her go. Qin Wanru lowered her eyes and said slowly. A maid gave away the hairpin just to make friends with Dong Xiu or to leave me. It seems that this maid is anxious, then give her a chance. Let's see what she wants to do in such a hurry. It was Qin Huayong and Madame Dowager who decided to hire an etiquette instructor. Originally, it was only for Qin Yuru. But considering that Qin Wanru was sensible, she was still young and not very familiar with the etiquette and rules in the capital city. It was better to let someone teach her, so they hired 2 etiquette instructors. Because the main purpose was to hire an etiquette instructor for Qin Yuru, Madame D also took the initiative to ask Di Yan to tell his mother to ask Duke Yong's mansion for help. It was said that they hired 2 famous nannies in the capital city. They used to teach etiquette in the palace and were released later when they were old. Today was the day that the 2 nannies would come, but there was no news until now. Qing Shui went to Madame Dowager's Xining Pavilion and found Nanny Duan. Nanny Duan told her that the 2 nannies who had been hired could not come. It was said that they had been invited away by other families. Now another 2 nannies had been replaced. They were rushing to the mansion and would ask Qin Wanru to come when they arrived. After asking the questions, Qing Shui went to report to Qin Wanru. Replaced nannies? Qin Wanru asked in surprise, didn't they say that they had been hired before? Why were they invited away now? Nanny Duan said that the other nanny had been hired a long time ago. When Countess Yong said that she had not officially decided on the matter. She said that she had to go to our mansion to show Madame Dowager, Madam, and young ladies to confirm it. Qing Shui had asked clearly just now, so she answered cleverly. She had just gotten the job, so of course she had to ask carefully. In other words, Countess Yong had said it casually and did not take it seriously at all. How about the new nanny? Qin Wanru thought for a moment and asked. I heard that the new nanny is also excellent, even better than the previous 2. She was just released from the palace. The rules and etiquette of the palace are very in line with the current rules. If it was not because she was implicated by something, she would not be released at this time, Qing Shui replied. The nanny who taught etiquette in the palace was released at this time. Qin Wanru's heart skipped a beat. She suddenly thought of a person, and a trace of deepness flashed in her eyes. If it was really that person, then she must keep her this time. But if it was really her, she believed that Qin Yuru would not want her. Of course, this person was specially sent to her, but this was exactly what she wanted. She hoped that it was the person she was thinking of. It did not take long for Nanny Duan to invite her over. When Qin Wanru invited her into the room, she found that Qin Yuru had not come yet. Madame Dowager was sitting in the main seat, and there were two women in their 30s sitting on both sides. Neither of them looked like old nannies with wrinkles. In particular, the one on the left was a beauty in her 30s. She had a very beautiful face, but there was no smile on her face, and she looked a little stern. At this time, she did not talk to Madame Dowager, but just sat on one side with a cold face. She seemed to be very unhappy, which was actually very unlikable. The other one looked a little older and was also good at talking. They talked happily with Madame Dowager, and they looked kind. Madame Dowager's face was full of smiles, and it was obvious that Madame Dowager liked them very much. Qin Wanru came in and bowed to Madame Dowager according to the rules. Then she stood aside and curiously looked at the two young nannies. "Zhuozhuo, this is Nanny Zheng and Nanny Huang. Come and greet them." Madame Dowager smiled and waved to her. Qin Wanru bowed to the two nannies in a natural manner. A servant girl outside the curtain reported that Qin Yuru had come. Qin Wanru stepped to the side, and the little servant girl lifted the curtain. Qin Yuru walked in with Mei Shui. She was dressed in light green clothes, and she was tall and beautiful. She was completely different from Qin Wanru, who was still a little bun. She was in the prime of her life, and she was beautiful and looked extraordinary. As a famous beauty in Jiangzhou, Qin Yuru was naturally outstanding. Wherever she stood, she made people feel that she was extraordinary. The smiling nanny seemed to have a deeper smile. After looking at Qin Yuru, she could not help but look at Qin Wanru. Originally, she thought that the sisters from a small place could not do anything, but she did not expect them to be so outstanding. Although the older one looked beautiful, the younger one was even more exquisite, but she was still a little too young. After Qin Yuru came forward and bowed to Madame Dowager, she looked at the two nannies and had already made up her mind. She took 2 steps forward, took Madame Dowager's hand, and shook it with a kiss. "Grandma, I want this nanny." She was referring to the smiling and amiable-looking nanny. Why choose Nanny Huang? This matter was facilitated by Duke Yong's mansion, and the purpose was for Qin Yuru. Naturally, Qin Yuru could choose by herself. However, Madame Dowager was still a little surprised that Qin Yuru chose the smiling Nanny Huang, so she asked. "Grandma, I heard that Nanny Huang has taught me very well in the past. Although she is a little strict, she is very useful. Yuru has just arrived in the capital city, and she is not very clear about many rules. Previously, because of her ignorance, she made a fool of herself. Therefore, I will choose a stricter teacher for myself." Qin Yuru's words were particularly pleasant to hear, and there was a slight smile on her face. It seemed that she was not only a very good person, but also a person with self-awareness. She should be a young lady who knew the rules very well. Nanny Huang was also very satisfied and secretly nodded in her heart. In fact, she originally liked the second miss of Qin's mansion. Although this child was young, she would definitely be a stunning beauty when she grew up, and it was easier to teach her when she was young. However, this first miss was also so well-behaved and sensible, so it was good to teach her. "Grandma." Qin Wanru reached out and pulled Madame Dowager's sleeve. She raised her head and looked at Madame Dowager eagerly, and then looked at Nanny Huang. "Second sister, don't embarrass Grandma. If you act coquettishly, Grandma will be speechless. But this Nanny Huang is specially chosen by Aunt for me. Second sister, don't fight for her anymore," Qin Yuru said with a smile. Her words seemed to be a joke, but if Qin Wanru said it to Madame Dowager again, it would mean that she was fighting for the person she liked. The reason why she said it was chosen by Countess Yong for her was that she didn't believe Grandma would have the nerve to give the person to Qin Wanru. Moreover, this person was indeed chosen by Countess Yong in a roundabout way for her. This nanny Huang was famous in the teaching circle in the capital city. She could not only teach well, but also use her previous relationships to enter the circle of noble ladies in the capital city. How could Qin Yuru give such a good thing to Qin Wanru? As for the other nanny, Qin Yuru felt bad luck from the bottom of her heart. A palace concubine who lost favor and was sent out of the palace, how could she know the rules? Even if she knew the rules, she had to avoid arousing suspicion. It was always bad luck for a person who came out of the palace with a crime. If one day the nobles in the palace remembered her, even the person she taught would feel that she was not pleasing and might even vent their anger on her. Of course, this nanny Zheng was specially given to Qin Wanru to thank her. Chapter 175. Yes, Grandma. Qin Wanru said softly. She stepped forward obediently, put her hands on the side of Nanny Zheng, and bowed sideways. There was no sign of displeasure on her face because of Qin Yuru's words just now. Nanny Huang's eyes fell on Qin Wanru involuntarily. She looked her up and down and showed a little surprise. Seeing Qin Wanru's bow, Nanny Zheng, who had been keeping a straight face, finally showed some emotion in her eyes. This bow was so standard that even Qin Yuru's bow just now could not compare with hers. It seemed that Nanny Zheng had learned the rules in the palace, and her body slightly squatted just right. A little higher would be too high, and a little lower would be too low. Second Miss Qin. Nanny Zheng finally spoke, and her voice was a little hoarse. Nanny Zheng. Qin Wanru said with a soft smile. Her watery eyes were also full of joy. It could be seen that she really liked Nanny Zheng, which made Nanny Zheng feel a little relieved. This child is not only good-looking but also knows the rules very well, or is very polite. I didn't expect that when Nanny Zheng was released from the palace and everyone tried to avoid her, there is such a miss who doesn't dislike me at all, which is really surprising. Nanny Zheng thought. If I teach Second Miss Qin anything wrong in the future, please forgive me, Second Miss Qin. Nanny Zheng's face was slightly moved, and her expression softened. There was even a trace of a smile on her lips. She thought that maybe it was a good thing to leave the palace. Seeing that Qin Yuru and Qin Wanru were satisfied, Madame Dowager breathed a sigh of relief and immediately asked them to return to the yard with their etiquette instructors. Back in the yard, Qin Wanru asked Nanny Yu to arrange accommodation for Nanny Zheng, and invited Nanny Zheng into the room. After entering the room and greeting Nanny Zheng again, Nanny Zheng's eyes fell on Qin Wanru, and she frowned. May I ask how old Miss is? 11 years old. Qin Wanru took the initiative to pour a cup of tea for her and said. Why do you look so young? Nanny Zheng did not expect that Qin Wanru was already 11 years old, and she looked a little surprised. Most 11-year-old girls were already slim and basically had the shape of a young girl, but Qin Wanru still looked like a little girl. You will grow up in the future. Qin Wanru said confidently. In her last life, she was not shorter than other women when she grew up. It was just that she grew up a little later, so she was a little short before. In the future. Second Miss, based on your age, you're not young anymore. After the new year, you'll be 12. This age is often the best age to look at girls in the capital. If Second Miss continues to look like this, it won't do. Nanny Zheng said bluntly. His words made Qin Wanru blush, and her delicate face turned red. Actually, this kind of words should not be said in front of her, right? Second Miss, you don't have to feel embarrassed. This is what girls have to do when they grow up. I have a few prescriptions here, which can be used to regulate the body and won't hurt the body. You can take some medicinal baths with you every day. Since Nanny Zheng had made up her mind, she naturally considered for Qin Wanru carefully. Qin Wanru's face was extremely beautiful. Even Nanny Zheng, who was used to seeing beauties in the palace, had to admire her. But even so, she was still too young. When people saw the Second Miss, few people were amazed by her beauty at first glance. Most people thought she was still young and just a little child. Nanny Zheng, you don't need to take medicinal baths. You can grow up naturally. Big sister's matter has not been settled yet. I don't need to worry. Qin Wanru raised her head. Although her face was red, she didn't look flustered at all, as if what she said was not the most shameful topic of an unmarried daughter. Such a bearing made Nanny Zheng involuntarily look at her a few more times. The feeling that the second miss in front of her gave her was completely different from that of a little girl like her. If she didn't see such a little girl in front of her, Nanny Zheng would almost think that the second miss in front of her was a miss cultivated by a big aristocratic family. This kind of calmness, this kind of words, and this kind of indifference to one's own appearance, how many women could do this? Nanny Zheng straightened her body, and her eyes became a little serious. For the first time, she treated the second miss in front of her as an adult. Second miss, I mean that you don't need to be outstanding. Just let nature take its course. You don't need to ask for anything too much. Otherwise, you will only be inferior. Qin Wanru smiled slightly and said meaningfully. Second miss, you don't want to marry a good man? Nanny Zheng asked in confusion. She didn't want to marry. This was actually Qin Wanru's real thought. In her last life, she died miserably, and her marriage was delayed again and again. Although she finally married Wen Shiqi, who was a good man and took good care of her, it was an ill-fated relationship after all. In the end, she became a widow and was even driven out of the gate of Wen's mansion. Considering all these reasons, Qin Wanru felt that it was better not to talk about this marriage. Of course, she would not say this at this time, because it would make people feel that she was too weird. Therefore, she euphemistically changed her words to let nature take its course. Just let nature take its course. Qin Wanru smiled, and her long eyelashes fluttered, covering all the emotions in her eyes. If she could, she felt that it was better to let nature take its course and not get married. If Shui Rulan gave birth to a child, it would be best if it was a boy. Then the child who inherited everything in General's mansion would be the future of General's mansion, and she could also rely on her younger brother and die alone. Nanny Zheng looked at Qin Wanru in front of her in surprise. Such a young child seemed to have experienced all the vicissitudes of life and seen all the ways of the world. Unexpectedly, she didn't care about the things that women from aristocratic families yearned for. Was she too young to understand, or she understood and didn't want to? Looking at the pair of beautiful smiling eyes in front of her, Nanny Zheng felt that this child should understand, but she didn't want to. Originally, because of the matter of leaving the palace, she felt that everything was boring, but suddenly she felt interested again. Nanny Zheng, are you willing to stay in Qin's mansion with me in the future? Qin Wanru suddenly smiled, and there seemed to be a burning fire beating in her eyes. I'm just an etiquette instructor. I will go back after teaching second miss for a while. Nanny Zheng didn't understand what Qin Wanru meant and replied. I'm still young. If I still want an etiquette instructor to teach me, it will take at least several years. Nanny Zheng just came out of the palace, and it is unlikely that she will return to the palace in the future. Don't you want a long-term residence? The smile on Qin Wanru's face was as warm as the spring breeze. These words reminded Nanny Zheng of something sad. Her face darkened again, and she remained silent. In fact, she did want to return to the palace. Qin's mansion was just a springboard in the transitional period. She believed that her master would also find a way. Nanny Zheng, I heard that you were released from the palace, and you were implicated because of some affairs. I don't care who Nanny Zheng used to serve, but I believe that no matter who it is, even if it is the Empress, it is not easy to get a person who has been released from the palace. If they could really keep her, they would not have released her at the beginning. Nanny Zheng was indeed the person in her imagination, so Qin Wanru naturally would not let her go. At this time, looking at Nanny Zheng's face, she knew what she was still expecting, so she simply broke all her expectations and said straightforwardly without any hesitation. Second miss, how do you know about the affairs in the palace? Nanny Zheng's face became very ugly and gloomy. I come to your mansion only to be an etiquette instructor for Second Mississippi. As for other things, please be careful with your words, second Miss Chin. Even if second Miss is still young, some things can't be said. It seemed that something in her heart was broken, and Nanny Zheng was very unhappy. Nanny Zheng, do you think I'm right? Qin Wanru smiled slightly and leaned back, which made her look very out of etiquette, but she did it very well, which made people inexplicably feel that what she did was not impolite. What do you want, second Miss? Nanny Zheng's heart seemed to be hit hard by something, which made her very uncomfortable. Or it could be said that some things were as transparent as glass, but she did not intend to break it. But now it was broken by Qin Wanru unceremoniously. I don't want to do anything. I just feel that there is one less person like you around, so I want you to stay. What do you think, Nanny Zheng? Seeing Nanny Zheng's angry face, Qin Wanru continued to say unhurriedly, as if she did not see the fierce look on Nanny Zheng's face. Second Miss Qin, you just said that you have no ambition, but now you have exposed yourself. Nanny Zheng sneered, and her delicate face flushed with anger. She suddenly stood up. Letting nature take its course means letting others bully me. Or in Nanny Zheng's understanding, letting nature take its course means giving up everything, letting others bully me at will, and even can't protect the people I care about most? Qin Wanru said with a slight smile. Her smile was very light, so light that it was almost impossible to see the smile at the corner of her lips. At this moment, although she was smiling, it made people feel cold. It was a deep and serene coldness that made people feel an inexplicable sense of creepiness. Nanny Zheng was shocked and looked at Qin Wanru in front of her in astonishment. She had imagined that the second Miss of the Qin family had thousands of forms, but she had never seen the one in front of her. That kind of sarcasm even contained some bloodiness that she had experienced all year round in the palace. It was impossible for such a young lady in boudoir to experience elegance and blood. But this little girl who had not yet grown up in front of her strangely appeared in front of her, which shocked Nanny Zheng from the bottom of her soul. This kind of treacherous thing could not be expressed in words, but it reminded Nanny Zheng of herself unconsciously. Didn't she give up everything and be driven out of the palace? Didn't she let others bully her at will? Now she was avoided as a plague. If Qin's mansion had not just moved to the capital city and was unfamiliar with the people and the place, Nanny Zheng believed that they would not use her. Was he at the end of his rope? All the waiting she insisted on was actually just a bubble that she weaved for herself. If it was poked, there would be nothing left. Chapter 176. But there was a kind of fatal attraction, which attracted Mammy Zheng and made her unable to say no. In fact, she was not reconciled to it. Nanny Zheng, if you stay, I promise you that if you want to leave in the future, I will set you free. Looking at the changing expression on Nanny Zheng's face, Qin Wanru's smile became deeper and deeper. She was afraid that she would not have a peaceful life in the future. She needed more powerful help to go on steadily. Although Nanny Yu was her wet nurse, she could not help her well because of her limited knowledge in various aspects. She was loyal, but she lacked ability. Nanny Zheng in front of her was the best candidate. In her last life, she had heard of such a person. She was very resourceful, but because she was released from the palace, she could not enter a big aristocratic family to be an etiquette instructor. Finally, she entered the mansion of an official's family who had just arrived in the capital city. That was an unknown miss before, but she was raised to be a lady with etiquette and soon entered the circle of noble ladies in the capital city. It was said that the miss, who was not an outstanding miss, not only had an excellent reputation, but also became the ultimate power figure in the mansion when she married the second daughter-in-law of a famous aristocratic family. It really amazed everyone. The most important thing was that she had the help from the palace. And the so-called help from the palace should refer to Nanny Zheng, who became her etiquette instructor at that time and finally married with her. A palace servant who was punished to leave the palace unexpectedly had such a powerful means. This originally made Qin Wanru admire her. Now that this person came, she would let her stay. Second Miss, do you dare to accept me? If you come, I dare to accept you. Second miss, I promise you. Such a small child made her feel that she was too scheming. Nanny Zheng thought that she should be afraid, but she heard her voice without hesitation. After saying that, she stood up, knelt on the ground, and kowtowed to Qin Wanru several times. At this moment, she was no longer Qin Wanru's etiquette instructor, but a servant who served Qin Wanru. Nanny Zheng, please get up. After accepting her bow, Qin Wanru stood up and reached out to help her. Yu Jie also hurriedly gave her a hand on the side. Second miss, this servant will sign the contract in a moment. The hesitation in her eyes disappeared, and Nanny Zheng looked at Qin Wanru and said. Since she was a servant, she naturally had to sign a contract to sell herself. Since she was released from the palace, she was a free person, but she had been serving others and had no other relatives. In fact, Nanny Zheng did not know where she would go. Now that he had made up his mind to follow Qin Wanru, he had to prepare the contract of selling himself properly. Everything in the past should be forgotten, and his master would be the second Miss Qin in front of him in the future. Nanny, you'll be my etiquette instructor from now on. Qin Wanru looked at her with appreciation and wanted to pull her to sit down. Nanny, you don't have to be so polite. If Wanru does something wrong in the future, just tell me. As for other affairs, please take care of them. Yes, this old servant will remember. Sensing the respect from Qin Wanru's heart, Nanny Zheng thought for a while and changed the way she addressed Qin Wanru. However, she did not sit down on the chair on the side, but stood behind Qin Wanru obediently. Since she had decided to be a servant, she should act like a servant. Since this matter had been settled, Qin Wanru did not stand on ceremony anymore. She asked Yu Jie to take Nanny Zheng to write the contract of selling herself and sign it. Then she went to report to Madame Dowager and Shui Rulan. As for the contract of selling herself, Qin Wanru kept it for herself and did not intend to send it out. When she went to report to Shui Rulan, Qin Wanru specially asked Yu Jie to tell Qianghua that if someone from Madame D's place went out later, she should send someone to inform her. If Madame D knew such a news, she would definitely inquire about Nanny Zheng in detail. How could she let go of such a good opportunity? For the time being, Madame D did not play tricks on Shui Rulan's belly, but it did not mean that she would not play tricks on other things. This was almost a blackmail for her. How could Madame D not accept it? Moreover, it was said that the servant girl had been guarding outside the gate for a few days. It was hard for Di Yan not to go out these days. Madame Dowager was very surprised that Nanny Zheng was willing to stay in the Qin's mansion. Among the officials in the capital city, the Qin's mansion, which had not even been assigned a real position, was extremely small and unstable. Madame Dowager didn't know what Nanny Zheng was thinking and was willing to stay. However, Madame Dowager was very happy that someone in the palace was willing to stay and teach Qin Wanru as a servant. She immediately asked Nanny Duan to reward Nanny Zheng and asked her to serve Qin Wanru well. Qin Wanru was still young, so it was indeed a good thing to have a long-term etiquette instructor. Nannies like this who taught young ladies the rules and etiquette of the palace actually did not stay in each mansion for long. When the young ladies almost mastered the etiquette, the nannies would leave. Of course, there were some who stayed for a long time, but they had never sold themselves as servants. This was also a rare thing. Therefore, when the news came to Qin Yuru, she was stunned at first and then laughed so hard that she could not stand up straight. Qin Wanru actually kept such an unlucky servant by her side. Was she not afraid that the people in the palace would blame her? She was really ridiculous. Nanny Huang also heard the news, but she did not laugh at it. She just closed her eyes slightly and then opened them again. Looking at Qin Yuru who was laughing so hard that she lost her composure, she said lightly, "First miss, no matter what happened, you should not laugh like this. It is impolite. At most, you should just smile a little." Nanny Huang, I know. I just can't control myself. Nanny Huang, since Nanny Zheng is willing to stay, why don't you also stay? The conditions here will not be worse than second sisters, and I can even give you better treatment. Qin Yuru said with a somewhat sarcastic smile. First miss, you must be joking. Nanny Huang's face slightly darkened. Although she could not figure out Nanny Zheng's behavior and felt it was indescribably strange, this could not be the reason why this first miss said such somewhat insulting words. Nanny Huang suddenly felt that she had misjudged this first Mississippi. In fact, this first miss was not very sensible. Nanny Huang, don't be angry. I really think this thing is very ridiculous. My second sister is not a person who can be fooled. She is sophisticated. Is this Nanny Zheng really not deceived and became a servant in the mansion? She gave up being an etiquette instructor and chose to be a servant. I don't know what Nanny Zheng wants. Qin Yuru joked. First miss, please be careful with your words. Nanny Huang felt that she really misjudged this first Mississippi. Although they were in the mansion now, was this elder sister who kept saying bad things about her younger sister really a first miss who was well-educated and well-mannered? Alright, I only invited you to be an etiquette instructor, not to reprimand me. It's your first time in the mansion, so I'll ask someone to take you to have a rest. I'm going to see my mother. Qin Yuru said impatiently. There were no outsiders here. Although an etiquette instructor was not a servant, she was just like a servant in the mansion. Did she really intend to discipline her? First miss, it is better to learn a rule first. Nanny Huang said expressionlessly. She stood in front of Qin Yuru and did not intend to let her go. What? You dare to stop me? Qin Yuru was furious. She was not ready to be educated by others. If you want to learn, then I will go back. Nanny Huang took a step back and bowed to her respectfully. Then she straightened her back and turned to leave. Qin Yuru did not expect that this smiling Nanny Huang was so difficult to deal with. After being stunned for a moment, she reacted, and her face immediately became very ugly. This matter was decided by Qin Huayong and Madame Dowager, and there was no room for her to refuse. Mei Shui, who was standing beside her, knew her mind. She hurriedly reached out and pulled Nanny Huang to smooth things over. Nanny Huang, don't be anxious. It is not that Miss doesn't want to learn, nor does she disrespect you. But you see, she has just arrived, and we still have to arrange a place for you to live. There will be many days in the future, and we have to satisfy you. It seems that she can't learn today. Nanny Huang, you'd better go to see the place to live first. If there is anything you are not satisfied with, just tell me. I will ask someone to change it immediately. Qin Yuru pulled a long face, and her smile looked vague. Anyone could see that she was not very happy. At this moment, she felt that her aunt must have mistaken her for someone else. Why was Qin Wanru's etiquette instructor so docile and even sold herself to be her servant without saying anything? Her etiquette instructor looked easy to get along with, but in fact, she was an unpleasant and inflexible person when they got along with each other. If she had known this, she would have picked Nanny Zheng just now. Looking at Qin Yuru's expression, Nanny Huang sighed secretly in her heart. It seemed that she would not be very successful in educating Qin Yuru this time. This first Miss Qin was obviously disobedient. But now she was a newcomer, so she could not be pushed too much. After thinking about it, she no longer stopped Qin Yuru, stood up, and left with Mei Shui to see the room prepared for herself. Seeing Nanny Huang leave, Qin Yuru snorted coldly, and then went out to Madame D's Yulan pavilion. Who is she? She really thinks that she is a master. Madame D's Yulan pavilion was very quiet. Since the day Qin Yuyong almost killed Madame D, it had been very quiet. Of course, the servants did not know that Madame D was almost killed. They just felt that the atmosphere in the courtyard was very bad recently, and no one dared to say much. Even the instructions were whispered, for fear of provoking Madame D. The little servant girl was beaten to death by Madame D. Although the blood on the ground was washed away, the blood in people's hearts was not so easy to wash away. It was clean. Many people in the mansion were new now, and they secretly said that Madame D was a cruel person. Some people also said that Madame D was jealous and vicious. What happened in the kitchen before was that she wanted to make Madame Chouet lose the baby in her belly. Since she could not give birth herself, she would not allow others to give birth. Of course, these rumors were spread secretly, and they were brought out of the mansion unknowingly. When Qin Yuru entered the room, it was very quiet outside, but she heard some sounds inside. It seemed that Madame D was talking to someone, but she could not hear it clearly. She only vaguely mentioned her name. Qin Yuru listened carefully, but still did not hear it clearly, so she walked into the inner room. Chapter 177. Seeing that it was Qin Yuru who came in, Madame D and Nanny Zhou breathed a sigh of relief. "Mother, are these my newly made clothes?" Qin Yuru didn't care and looked at the dresses in Madame D's hands curiously. She could tell that they were newly made and the color was a little familiar. Looking at them carefully, she found that they were made of the material she had chosen before. Were these her clothes? "Yes, they are." Madame D nodded. "Then why didn't you send them to me, but to Mother?" Qin Yuru said discontentedly. "I asked Nanny Zhou to get them. They are not completely done yet." Madame D put down the clothes in her hands and said with her eyes flashing. "Then why did you bring them here, Mother?" Qin Yuru asked in confusion. "Although the material of these clothes looks good, they are not very outstanding. I have a few good servant girls here who want to embroider some flowers for you to be more outstanding," Madame D said. "Thank you, Mother." Qin Yuru was overjoyed. She didn't like making clothes at that time. If Madame D embroidered some outstanding flowers for her, she would be very happy. "Mother, what did you choose for me?" "Let me see." Qin Yuru said and walked over. Madame D and Nanny Zhou looked at each other and coughed. "I am choosing the patterns, but I haven't chosen them yet. I will show them to you when I am done." "Didn't you say that there will be an etiquette instructor coming today? Why didn't she learn from her etiquette instructor in her own courtyard, but came to me?" Hearing her words, Qin Yuru immediately remembered her purpose of coming. She sat on the chair beside and said sullenly, "Mother, I don't like this Nanny Huang. She is so troublesome to manage. Qin Wanru chose a good one, and I heard that she is willing to sell herself as a slave to follow her." "What?" Madame D didn't understand and asked in a daze. "She's the troublesome palace maid that my aunt mentioned. Now she has sold herself to our mansion. I don't know what she's thinking, but she actually likes Qin Wanru." The more Qin Yuru thought about it, the more upset she felt. She also wanted an etiquette instructor who was so obedient. Sold herself? Madame D and Nanny Zhou widened their eyes and gasped. They had never heard of such a thing for so many years. Etiquette instructors had been in a mansion for a longer period of time, and it was even possible for them to follow their husbands after they got married. However, they had never heard of anyone selling themselves, and the one who sold herself was a palace maid who had just been released from the palace. In fact, everyone would avoid a palace servant who was released for that reason. How could Qin Wanru dare to accept her? Yes, it means to sell oneself. I heard that grandmother has also put it on file. Qin Yuru pursed her lips and said, "Isn't grandmother afraid that this person will implicate the whole mansion? Father is still waiting for his position. If someone talks about this, it will be really troublesome." Although she said it was troublesome, Qin Yuru looked more like she was watching a good show. "Madam." Nanny Zhou was pleasantly surprised. Madame D waved her hand and motioned her to stop talking. She looked at Qin Yuru and said, "How is your nanny? I heard that she is very likable and well-educated. She used to teach her to enter the palace. She is a famous etiquette instructor in the capital city. You have to get along well with her, and you can't offend her." Listening to Qin Yuru's tone just now, Madame D was quite worried. "Mother, I know. I will listen to you. Moreover, Aunt also said so." Qin Yuru lowered her head and pulled the handkerchief with her face turning red. Countess Yong hinted that if she learned the rules well, the two families could get engaged. Countess Yong finally gave her a definite answer. How could Qin Yuru not be happy? Therefore, she accepted the job of etiquette instructor without any resistance. Moreover, she followed Countess Yong's order and chose Nanny Huang, who was very helpful to her. That's good. In this case, you can't be petty. Your aunt prefers girls who are more docile and obedient. You can't let her hear any bad rumors about you. Seeing that Qin Yuru was not angry, Madame D breathed a sigh of relief. She was afraid that Qin Yuru would do something out of control again. Yes, mother. Then I will go back first. Thinking of Countess Yong's words, Qin Yuru felt that she could still bear the discipline of Nanny Huang. She would bear it first. She could bear it for so many years in Jiangzhou. Now that her dream would come true, why couldn't she bear it? In order to marry into Duke Yong's mansion, she could bear anything. After thinking it through, Qin Yuru went back. Madam, was Nanny Zheng, who was invited by Countess Yong this time, driven out of the palace. After Qin Yuru left, Nanny Zhou smacked her lips and said. That day, when the person sent by Countess Yong told Madame D something, she was beside Madame D and heard it clearly. Eldest sister-in-law did say so. A girl who was rejected by the palace dared to accept her. The old woman is really bold. Madame D sneered and said with a gloomy look, you go to Duke Yong's mansion later and ask my eldest sister-in-law what crime Nanny Zheng has committed. Which noble in the palace did she offend? She couldn't afford to offend any of the nobles in the palace, especially the nobles who could drive people out of the palace directly. When Qin Yuru said that the etiquette instructor entered the Qin's mansion, Madame D thought it was a good thing. Maybe she could find a way to deal with the bitch and the mean girl from this matter. Nanny Zhou also had such an idea. Originally, she didn't know how to deal with Madame Shui and Second Mississippi. With the new Nanny Zheng, she was born to have a handle on them. Okay, I will ask Countess Yong about it later. Nanny Zhou nodded and agreed. Ask someone to embroider the clothes with a few patterns and let the first miss wear them when she might meet Duke Xing's mansion. If this is true, there will be some clues. Duke Xing's mansion will definitely find us, and we don't have to find them. After saying this, Madame D talked about what they had discussed in a low voice before and threw several dresses at her hand to Nanny Zhou. Madam, in fact, I still have doubts. Nanny Zhou took the dresses and hesitated. Whether it is true or not, we have to try. When I was in Jiangzhou, I thought I could ask a former servant of Duke Xing's mansion. But I didn't expect it was a useless one. Madame D snorted. In fact, it was just a guess that combined all kinds of things she had seen and thought. She didn't take it seriously at first. But now, he had no choice but to take it seriously. One of the most important reasons was Qin Huayong's attitude. The conjecture he had made at the beginning was just a casual remark. Even he didn't take it seriously, but he didn't expect Qin Huayong to take it seriously. Let's have a try. If it failed, it would have no impact on her family. If it succeeded, the benefits would be amazing. Her daughter would be powerful, and she would also benefit. However, it was better to ask that servant girl to come here. If she could follow Yuru, there would be some clues. Madam, I think it is too coincidental. How can there be such a coincidence? Nanny Zhou certainly knew what Madame D was thinking, but she still thought it was too whimsical. How could it be so coincidental? And she even linked up the cause and effect as if it was true. It doesn't matter whether it is a coincidence or not. Let's take it as a coincidence for now. Maybe it is true. Being asked by Nanny Zhou, Madame D was also very hesitant. But after thinking for a while, she immediately became firm. It was such a good opportunity. If it was true, it would be a great fortune, and Yuru's identity would be extremely noble in the future. Nanny Zhou also needed to report before leaving Qin's mansion. Now it was Shui Rulan who was in charge, so she naturally needed to report to Shui Rulan. Nanny Zhou was very careful and followed the rules. Then she went to Chuehua Gate. After saying something to the old maid guarding the Chuehua Gate, Nanny Zhou walked out. After a few steps, she suddenly saw a servant girl hiding in front of her. Nanny Zhou's eyes were very sharp, so she immediately found that it was not a servant girl of her mansion. She immediately stood still, turned around, and walked over. After the servant girl hid in the bushes, when Nanny Zhou walked over, she saw that the servant girl was squatting there with her body curled up. It was obvious that she was hiding from her. Although the clothes on her body seemed to belong to her mansion, the pattern was not. Which mansion do you belong to? Why did you sneak into the mansion? Nanny Zhou had always helped Madame D to manage the mansion, so she was not weak. Seeing that there was something wrong with the servant girl, she immediately shouted. I am looking for someone. The servant girl did not expect that Nanny Zhou's eyes were so sharp. When she was found, she stood up in a panic. You? Which mansion do you belong to? Who are you looking for? Nanny Zhou looked up and down at the servant girl and said coldly. This was Qin's mansion, which was almost the inner yard of Qin's mansion. How did this servant girl sneak in? Was it because the clothes looked a bit like the clothes worn by the servant girls of Qin's mansion? I am looking for someone. The servant girl looked timid. Looking for who? Nanny Zhou became more and more suspicious. Looking for someone. I don't know if he is in your mansion. The servant girl was very flustered, but it seemed that she did not dare to say it. Tell me, who is it? How did you get into the mansion? Why did the guards let you in? Nanny Zhou said coldly. Once again, she could be sure that this servant girl did not belong to Qin's mansion. I am looking for someone. The servant girl seemed to be really scared. She stepped back and seemed to want to slip away. She stammered and made excuses. It was obvious that she did not want to tell the truth. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.